Release that which I by Ermu. Chapter 41 The Appearing of the First Demonic Beasts. As Brian had said, once it began to snow in Border Town, it would not stop soon. In one night, the town had been covered in a layer of white glaze. During the early morning, the snowfall had eased off. Only a few snowflakes occasionally dropped from the sky, but the weather was still gray. When he thought about how he would not see the sun for several months, Roland thought the idea was still a bit inconceivable. This was simply illogical, he thought, though it was already very weird that magic was a common thing in this world. However, how could demonic beasts have an impact on the sky? Unfortunately, he didn't have any weather satellites to look at this world's cloud formations. Walking on the road in the direction of the western city wall, Carter couldn't help but exclaim, "The town is deserted, there were still a bunch of people who followed the nobles who withdrew." "That's good, at least they will not hold us back," answered Roland as his breath fogged up in the cold air. "I have arranged for Berev to hold a census during the winter." What is a census? It is a statistic produced from going door to door, counting the number of people who stayed behind, asking them for their names and what kind of a job they have. All of this will then be registered. Roland explained, "As a result, during the war we will know how many human resources we can deploy, and after the war, pension can be implemented quickly and efficiently." What? Carter blinked confusedly and then laughed. "Your Highness, you are really not the same as before." "Oh? In the past, you would say something, and I wouldn't understand it. You would do some unfathomable and mysterious things, but after all, they did not confirm with the identity of the prince." And now, Carter paused and seemed to consider his next words, whether it was those strange training regulations or the novelties of the alchemic workshop, the results were surprisingly effective. Perhaps this is what my grandfather meant when he said, "Extraordinary people are extraordinary, because they can always see possibilities which ordinary people overlook." I have a feeling that there really is a possibility for you to become king. Yeah, suddenly Roland got a warm feeling within his heart. Is there any better feeling than when other people recognize your hard work? For a short time, he felt full of strength and felt that the gray sky wasn't as depressing as it was before. As the prince arrived at the wall, the militia, who had already cleared away all the snow, bowed to pay their respects. Roland thought that they should also learn to salute, and he asked, "How was the situation last night?" "There were no traces of demonic beasts," replied Iron X. "Your Highness, according to past experiences, we will still have a relatively stable time period after the first snowfall. During this period, the number of normal animals is still be larger than the number of demonic beasts, and if there are demonic beasts, they will be of the weaker species." Roland nodded. "You still have to continue to be vigilant." The regional rear walls had been transformed into barracks, so if there was no danger, most people could stay in the camp to rest and save energy. Roland implemented a rotation system, taking into account the low winter temperatures. Each team would only need to perform 2 hours of patrolling before they would be replaced. All these measures were set by Roland. He had asked Brian how it was in Longsong Stronghold and learned that they had no rotation system against the demonic beasts. The new recruits would be assigned to watch the movements of the demonic beasts and had to stay on watch the whole day. So consequently, they would slack off, to the point that situations where soldiers deserted would occur. During the winter, there were 20 to 30 people who were hanged because of dereliction of duty or violation of military orders. If they found traces of demonic beasts, it would become a mess because they didn't assign people to their own defense sectors. Thinking of the level of the art of war during this time, Roland already had a clear understanding of it. They paid extreme attention to personal honor and valor, and even emphasized plundering. Even knights would be in the front lines when charging into a city, nevertheless, they didn't need to plunder too much. Roland once more patrolled along the wall and saw that everything seemed to be going smoothly, but Roland found out that he had ignored a problem. That was the roadblocks. These obstructions were currently still clearly visible and would lead the demonic beasts towards the right section of the wall, but if what Brian said was true and the snow would fall for 2 to 3 months without any interruption, it could come to the point that the demonic beasts wouldn't see any obstructions and would attack all of the 600-yard-long wall. His militia force was clearly too small to attend to such a large battlefield. Sending soldiers down to clear the snow was a bad idea, because a few species like the demonic wolves were extremely agile, so he would definitely lose soldiers. Perhaps he would have to rely on the power of the witches. For example, he could let Nightingale take Anna out of the city to melt the snow with her fire and then sneak back, just like how she had brought Nana in and out of the Pine family's home. At this point, he heard a call from an observer on his left side. "Look in front." Roland and Carter both looked towards the position the observer had referred to. There, a group of small shadows crawled out from the snow, moving slowly in the direction of the wall. The hunter who was in control of this defense section turned to Roland and asked, "Your Highness, you say whether or not. Handle the situation according to the former drills, so judge the situation for yourself to determine whether you should blow the horn," Roland ordered. "At this point, you are more experienced than me." The soldier hesitated, but he eventually pulled the string off his crossbow and stood further down the wall to observe. Roland nodded his head in satisfaction. For now, when the number of demonic beasts that would attack Border Town was still unknown, it would be most important to maintain order on the wall. After all, they could quickly organize their defense according to the steps drilled into them from before. Gradually, the shadows came closer to the wall. When they were 50 yards away from the wall, Roland was finally able to clearly make out their appearances. Probably a variant of foxes? Their fur was grayish-black and their eyes were red. When they were at the walls, they were panting heavily. It looks like it wasn't long ago that they were turned into demonic beasts. "They aren't a threat," said Iron Axe, while aiming with his bow. "You mean they were infected by the breath of hell, which was expulsed in the west?" "It doesn't happen only in the west," Carter came over and answered. "The gates of hell can open anywhere in the mountains. There is no place safe from it in the mountains. In the north, there is an especially large path which is often under the attack of the demonic beasts. There, it seems that a part of the never-ending impassable mountain range was cut off. For more than a decade, this path was the main direction of attack from demonic beasts. The maniac monsters only lingered for a short moment at the base of the wall, before they raised their heads and released grim growls towards the crowd on the wall while preparing to leap. However, Iron Axe released his bowstring, and a sharp arrow accurately penetrated the neck of one of the demonic beasts, firmly nailing it to the ground. Roland noted that the blood which flowed out from the beast was black. It was the same kind of erosion for the demonic beasts and witches. But why could the witches still save their consciousness and be saved after their awakenings, when the animals would always turn into maniacs while their bodies mutated? "If I have the opportunity, I need to go and take a look behind the mountain of despair," thought Roland. In the prince's memory, it was a place where no human being could set foot. It was the place where the gates of hell opened. However, because no one had ever visited it, most of the knowledge of it came from ancient books, and he had no way to verify the rumors, so he had some doubts about the gates of hell. Chapter 42 Accidents. What happens when a demonic beast bites a human? Roland asked. Will they become the same like the demonic beast? Roland hoped it wouldn't turn into a medieval version of Resident Evil. After all, with their current level of technology, they had no way to extract the virus and produce the required antigens. Of course not, Iron Axe gave Roland a kind, "How can you ask such a question? Look, they would turn into a corpse." "What about their meat, can we eat it?" Carter exclaimed loudly, "Your Highness! How can you think about eating the meat of demonic beasts? They are contaminated with the breath of hell." "Ah." Roland looked at Iron Axe, who nodded and said, "Your chief knight is right, I have cut off meat from some demonic beasts to feed to my dogs. The result was that my dogs died shortly after eating the meat." "That happened? That's really a shame." Roland sighed. During this time, the food sources were scarce. If they were able to eat the demonic beasts, the winter months would turn into months of simple harvest. Think about it, the whole forest of animals would turn mad and run in the direction of Border Town, so the militia would even be able to save hunting gear. After he walked along the whole wall, he decided to pay a visit to Nana. Roland had requisitioned the residence of a noble who recently left border town and used it as a field hospital. Of course, he claimed it as a school for foreign medicine. But just in case, it was near the city walls and was one of the best guarded places in border town. When the former owner of the residence returned to Longsong's stronghold, he had taken all his property with him, and the other inhabitants of border town were always ready to give up their homes. So, the housing was quite large, but they couldn't have many murals, carpets, porcelain vases, or other kinds of decorations. If it wasn't fairly clean, it would just look like a house that was vacant for a long time. Roland turned the first floor into one big room. Only the stairs to the upper floor and a small hallway were left. Then, he put 10 beds into the room. With this, his hospital was finished. It was quite a simple shape. There were no nurses and no doctors, even the 10 beds were unlikely to be used at all. After Nana's treatment, the patients weren't required to lay in the beds. Her treatment immediately bore fruits. During the day, Nana would normally stay on the second floor of the hospital and Anna would come by when she herself had nothing to do. Sir Pine and Brian were responsible for the first floor, and 2 guards were stationed at the entrance. However, Roland did not expect that the first patient of the field hospital would be a worker from the Northern Slope mine instead of a soldier from the militia which defended the walls. Asterisk. Nils felt his hands trembling. When he heard the hoarse scream of iron again, he tried to pick up his pace once more, but even with his fastest speed he couldn't fly. This was all because of his negligence, he thought. Damn, how could he forget the repetitive warnings of his senior knight? If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have grasped his chance to work with the big guy. Since the big guy was installed at the mine gate during the night, the miners' work became a lot easier. Originally, the most tiring part of the job was to drag the ore out of the mine when the mining basket was filled with stones. Generally, 2 people would push from the back and the rest would pull from the front. After years of usage, the originally uneven tunnel ground became flat due to the transporting of the baskets. The pad at the bottom of the iron ore basket also required frequent replacement. A week ago, the chief knight commanded that the senior knight and his men to transport a lot of strange-shaped parts made out of metal up to the mine, and then in the next few days they assembled them into a furnace. Nils had absolutely not foreseen that this furnace could move by itself when fueled with fire. It could not only move, but it also had extraordinary strength. The senior knight had said that it was His Royal Highness' invention and was seemingly called the steam engine. First, a basket had to be fastened with a rope to the steam engine, then a fire had to be lit before the big machine would begin to hum. Then, the winch began to turn and the basket was quickly hauled towards the mine entrance. Incredible! The senior knight had selected a person responsible for the steam engine after several test runs. When Nils was selected, he was very pleased with himself, since he had waited a long time for such a good opportunity. After all, he just had to stand in front of the machine. He would no longer have to dig out stones or minerals, and he would never ever need to push a basket. That last mine collapse still left him spooked. The words the senior knight told him were still in his head. He said it wasn't a difficult task, the big guy would do all the work. All he had to do was to pull the green lever first and then the red lever second. The senior knight also said that the green lever was linked to the intake valve, while an exhaust valve was linked with the red lever so that the steam would pass through the pipe into the cylinder. After the basket was pulled to the mine entrance, he would have to do the reverse if he wanted to stop the machine. First, he had to lift the red lever and then the green lever. With this, the steam would be discharged from the side of the boiler. After each cycle, the oven needed be supplemented with water until it was full. Although he didn't understand what a valve and a cylinder were, Nils still promised to do everything step by step. However, the senior knight stressed 2 points that were most important. First, the order could not be wrong. To start the engine, the green lever was first before the red lever. To stop, the green had to be closed after the red. If he made a mistake, it could lead to the destruction of the machine. The second point was that when he was discharging the steam, he had to constantly remind the miners to step back until the red lever was completely lifted. The first point Nils had engraved into his head, even with closed eyes, he wouldn't make a mistake. But with the second point he had some problems. Today, he was shutting down the machine as usual. He noticed that other miners were no longer around. He felt that he would be a fool if he shouted a warning when no one was around, so he was totally absorbed in pulling the red lever. The red lever was a bit hard to pull, and out of exhaustion, he had to bare his teeth during the pull. He hadn't expected Titus to appear in front of the stove when he pulled the lever. Nils hadn't seen him due to the steam engine's big size, and because of the loud noise it created, he hadn't even heard the footsteps. The white steam which was exhausted from the boiler directly rushed into Titus' face. Nils was stunned out of fright. He only saw Titus suddenly falling to the ground and rolling around, holding his face and screaming his life out. Titus' screams were so heartbreaking for Nils that they directly attacked the core of his being. Soon, other miners gathered around, opening Titus' hands by force to take a look at his wounds, only to see that his face only vaguely reminded them of a human face. Blood was oozing from his cooked and raw face, and his eyes were turned into white pearls. All the people present were sure that Titus couldn't be saved. Nils' soul slowly came back to his body. Titus had always taken care of him, due to his young age, and the work Nils was assigned was less than that of the other people, but the wages Nils got were never less than that of the others. And now, this accident only happened due to his negligence. Between his grief and anxiety, Nils suddenly remembered what the senior knight also said. If one of the miners were accidentally injured, he should be brought to the safe area near the walls. There was a newly opened medical center there. Although Nils knew that such a serious injury was an incurable wound and that the size of the injury was too big, even if herbal medicine could help a little, it couldn't stop the deterioration of Titus' health. Then, Titus would get high fever and would soon fall into a coma. But nonetheless, Nils still took Titus into his arms, regardless of the confused looks he got from the nearby people, bit his teeth together, and ran. If he did nothing and Titus died, Nils was afraid that he could never forgive himself for the rest of his life. Chapter 43 Be Strong. Sister Anna? When Nana heard thunderous footsteps coming from the stairs, she ran to the door and took a quick look, but she was soon disappointed because she found out that the person who was coming was His Royal Highness, the Prince. Anna should still be working, but she will probably come by later, said Roland when he arrived at Nana's side. Work? Nana had recently often heard this word out of the mouth of the prince. You mean she is burning this grey mud powder? For now, yes. Nana pouted as she went back to the table. I also have a job, she thought. My job is to stay here and wait to treat the soldiers who are injured while defending the town. Roland asked with a gentle smile, how is it? Do you feel bored when Anna isn't here, as he took a chair to sit by the fireplace? Well, Nana supported her chin with her hand so that she couldn't nod and give a true answer. It wasn't that she didn't want to treat the injured, but the sight of the injuries was just so horrible. She could still remember when she had to treat Brian. It was the first time she had to treat a human. The man was covered all over in blood that it seemed like he had bathed in blood. A reddish-brown blood clot had solidified in the pit of his stomach, his mouth resembled the look of a dried fish, and he was disgorging white fluids and red blood. Then, Nana had fainted. It was downright disgraceful. Nana raised her head to secretly glance at Roland. She saw that he had leaned back in his chair and was snoring. The prince seemed to be tired, she thought. His jobs were building the walls, training the soldiers, and protecting the town from the invasion of the demonic beasts. When he came to request her help, although she first hesitated for a long time, in the end she did not refuse. You will encounter some things that make you want to live on, even if you will have to struggle to live on. Nana didn't understand what this meant, but when she closed her eyes, Anna would appear within her mind, with her pair of bright blue eyes, just like a lake, surrounding her slowly. This was the reason she agreed to Roland's request. She wanted to be as strong as her sister, Anna. Suddenly, footsteps could be heard from downstairs again and Nana immediately jumped off her chair. She wanted to go to the door to see if it was Anna who came this time, but suddenly she was stopped by an invisible hand. Just wait a minute, there is more than one person. Nana patted her chest in dissatisfaction. You scared me, Sister Nightingale. Soon the door was open, and this time it was Brian, who was stationed here, who entered. Miss Pine, please come down. You have a patient who got burned. This was work for her, right? Nana took a deep breath. I will come down. She walked downstairs while two guards were busy with carrying an unconscious person towards a bed. Standing beside the bed was a short man with a face full of anxiety. Brian walked up to the patient and neatly tied the patient's hands and feet to the bed. When he was done tying, he closed up the area with previously prepared curtains and then led the little man out of the room. When Roland came down, he asked while rubbing his eyes, "What happened?" "Your Highness, North Slope Mine sent a seriously injured person. He looks like he was scalded." The prince walked over to Brian. He was burned by the steam engine, right? Was there a problem with the engine? Did you send him to Nana? He is in the medical room. Brian pointed to the direction of the door. I need you to look into this case. When he finished speaking, Roland walked towards the medical room. Nana slowly stepped near the injured man, only looking at him carefully within her peripheral vision. When she saw his face, his facial features had turned into paste, forming a round ball. What should have been red skin was dehydrated and inhumanely white. It just looked like a rag was laying on his face. At his neck were blisters as big as small eggs, some of them had even been broken, and the mucus oozing out from the blisters mixed together with the blood in the pillow. In the flickering shine of the fire, his appearance was more horrible than the devil in her nightmares. She took 2 steps back and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she saw her father watching her, full of concern. Are you okay? Nana nodded, thinking of the words Roland had told her, you only need to treat the injured the same as you treat the little animals. She once again moved towards the bed and stretched out her hands. An incredible feeling emerged within her body and gathered within the palm of her hand. She saw a ray of light being emitted from the fluorescent green liquid flowing out of her hands as it fell on the injured face. For her, this fluorescence light was obvious, but to others it seemed to be invisible. Then, the wounds began to change. The scorched skin was constantly shed off and new skin began to regrow at a visible speed. The wounded man's groans of pain gradually diminished until it stopped, and his breathing eased. It seemed like he just fell into a deep sleep. Nana exhaled, relieved. This time her own performance was surely better than last time, and she thought, I should have made a great progress with my training, right? My God, is this what His Highness meant when he spoke of your healing ability? This is the first time I've seen you do this, asked Sir Pine. Then he exclaimed, good girl, you're awesome. It is the power of the gods, Brian said in the same tone of awe. It was also Miss Nana who healed me when I was heavily injured. I really owe her so much. Ah, he is such a fool. Nana had to cover her face, because of shame. Doesn't he know that it was Sister Nightingale who smuggled him out and saved him on that day? When did that happen? Asked Sir Pine, full of wonder. Why didn't I know of it? Oh. Their powers have nothing to do with God, they belong to the witches themselves. Roland opened the curtain and stepped inside, coughed once and changed the subject. How are his injuries? He has basically recovered, Blaine excitedly said. It's like he was never hurt. Your Highness, with the help of Miss Nana, during the month of the demons, everyone who is fighting has a chance to survive. As long as they don't die on the spot, there will be no problem with saving their lives, the prince confirmed, indicating Brian that he should stop since the man woke up. Your name is Titus, right? The man who was named Titus had a look full of confusion and asked, What happened? Am I dreaming? You're not, Roland said. You're still alive. Are you? I have seen your Highness at the square. The man suddenly woke up like he was hit by lightning, jumped up from the bed, and fell to his knees. Your Royal Highness, was it you who saved me? It was the daughter of the Pine family who saved you. She is a witch and has a healing ability. Nana's mind froze. He directly said that she was a witch. Would she be okay? Sure enough, the look in the man's eye changed immediately. A woman, she is a witch. Your Highness, aren't they the devils? Don't speak such nonsense. When Sir Pine heard him speaking such words about his daughter, he angrily cried, "My daughter has nothing to do with the devil, but she even saved your life instead, man. Do you think the devil would reach out to you with a helping hand?" "No, no. Please forgive me for being impolite." Titus pulled his head immediately into a deep bow. "Thank you for saving my life, Miss Pine." Nana suddenly felt inexplicably uncomfortable. If she could, she would immediately rush out of the room, but a voice in her mind repeatedly reminded her, "Be strong." Later when Titus was sent away, Sir Pine worriedly asked, "Will this really be all right, Your Highness? In this way, I'm afraid my daughter will no longer be able to lead a normal life." "You have to think on the bright side, Sir Pine," comforted the prince. "We have to take advantage in this kind of situation, so that we will be able to break the deadlock. With this, Nana will maybe truly free in the future. Otherwise, in the following years, she will one day be exposed. Until then, I am afraid she can only live a life in seclusion." Real freedom? Nana didn't know what this meant, because even now she felt very free. But His Highness said when they would achieve it, Sister Anna would also be able to leave the castle just like herself. Maybe they could even return to Teacher Carl's college, right? Chapter 44, Hidden Answers. It was already late when Roland went back to the castle. It was snowing heavily again. He went directly into his bedroom, took off his coat and shook off the snow that got caught in its collar. Then, he hung it on a rack next to the fireplace. "Your Highness, don't you think that you have progressed much too quickly?" Nightingale's voice came out of nowhere, and then she became visible to the prince. "You mean the situation with Nana?" Roland poured each of them a glass of wine. Although the wine was more bitter than he was used to, slowly he had become used to its taste. Nightingale took the cup offered by the prince, but did not drink. She was waiting for the prince to give a longer answer. "There will never be a more appropriate time than now," said Roland. He drank his cup of wine all at once, only to fill it up once more afterwards. "I plan to let Nana play a big role with her ability during the months of the demons. So, it would have been impossible to conceal her identity as a witch anyway. She can instantly cure fatal injuries. This is nothing close to what ordinary herbs or bloodletting can do. Everyone will want this. Border Town is in the most western part of the kingdom. Here, so far away the center, the church's influence is very limited. If I were them, I wouldn't be willing to spend so many gold royals for a place which could be abandoned at any time." Roland continued, "We even don't have a small town church. The missionary left with the nobility to Longsong stronghold earlier. Knowing all this, what do you think Border Town is? It is an island, totally cut off from the outside world." "This was your plan since the beginning?" asked Nightingale, surprised. Roland nodded. "The never-ending snowfall will close the road to Longsong stronghold, and the entire town will be in my hands. We have at least 3 months to reverse the witches are evil point of view. With only mouth-to-mouth propaganda, the effect will be very limited. So, we must rely on real-life experiences in order to quickly eliminate the hatred caused by ignorance and misunderstanding." That was the reason why he wanted to let everyone think Nana was the cause of Brian's rescue. He wanted to create a different image of Nightingale. There existed a legend of a nurse who made an all-out effort to look after wounded people, resulting in the plummet of the wounded mortality rate, from 42% to 2%. Thus, the fighters conferred her the title of Lady with the Lamp, and the popularity of the whole nurse profession had been elevated to the rank of worship. Nana's ability to heal had more to offer than only heal the injured. As long as someone didn't die on the spot, she could restore him completely like he was never injured. This would be more important and boost the morale more than any weapon upgrade he had presented. At the same time, thanks to her family's decline within the aristocracy's ranks, her father had to deal with hunters and farmers often during the weekdays. Because of this, he had a very calm and kind attitude towards the normal civilians, and he even allowed Nana to visit Carl's collage and learn with them. This kind of act was absolutely unthinkable for even the lowest of barons. They would never agree if their children had something to do with the peasants. In their eyes, these people were the so-called untouchables. Can we really do this? Even Nightingale, when facing such a big monster like the church, felt extraordinarily small and weak. If we never try to change, we will never know the answer. Roland did not expect that he would be able to change the view of all the inhabitants of Border Town, but he at least hoped to plant seeds within the hearts of some and get a small team of supporters. Later, he wanted to relay on these seeds, to let them grow and let them spread. Within 3 months, many changes could be achieved. Nightingale thought about it and then whispered, "Why do you want to step out of the masses and help us witches?" In order to use their power for the production of resources, make himself more powerful, and have a better chance in winning the throne. Of course, all these answers were not suitable to say aloud. Even so, Roland was a mechanical engineer. He had played a good variety dating games, so he could even be seen as a veteran who knew a lot. So with the experience of having lived for more than 40 years in 2 different worlds, he knew that this time he had to face a crucial question and give the right answer. So he thought carefully about his next words, and said slowly, "I haven't told you yet, but I do not care about the background of any inhabitant of Border Town. I hope that one day, in my territory, even witches can live a life as free as any other person." This time Nightingale was silent for a long time, and the only sound left was the crackling of the burning firewood. Her face, highlighted by the flickering flames, was like an otherworldly picture. When she spoke again, Roland had enough time to free himself from the beautiful illusion. "You really don't have to accomplish all this." Her voice was small but gentle. "Please forgive me for lying to you before. My sisters in the Witch Cooperation Association have been living the life of refugees for far too long. They do not expect so much, their only goal is to have a place where they can live in seclusion. Even living in this castle would be enough." "How would that be different from living your life within a cage?" Roland shook his head, but then he suddenly came to an understanding. His eyes became wide open when he looked full of shock at Nightingale. "What do you mean? Are you saying that you are willing to bring your sisters back here?" Nightingale sighed and avoided looking directly at the prince. "When I do this, you will become the enemy of the church. Their arm has been stretched too far and has become too thin." Roland didn't mind the future road. Do the slogan, "The power of the king is granted by the god, the church and the mortal power will conflict sooner or later. As for Border Town, we only have to live through the next months, then they will not be able to do much to us. Here we are thousands of miles away from their seat of power. What do you think will happen when the Bishop of Longsong Stronghold holds a military trial to come to crusade me? My father would never allow this to happen. This would be a much too great of an attack against his royal power." Nightingale didn't know how to answer. She gave him her salute and left. When Nightingale was out of the room, Roland let himself fall onto the bed, and took in a deep breath to relax. There were some things he didn't tell her. For example, he didn't tell her that the center of the church's power was 1,000 miles away. In accordance with the world's new circulation speed, they would probably only be able to react in late spring. In addition to the distance, there was also his identity as a prince, so a big possibility would be that they would only send envoys to ascertain the situation. As a result, Roland thought that they would only arrive after half a year. By then, he himself would already have a solution to break their strength. Thus, the biggest risk of his plan wasn't the church, but rather the witches themselves. This point was only known by himself. Although at the moment the witches were at a disadvantage, the current situation would not last forever. The power of the witch did not rely on blood heritage, so there was no pattern to who would awaken, it was all random. This meant that they could not be eradicated, so their number could only increase. The church relies on their god's eye of retribution, and for the moment they can still maintain their advantages over the witches with it, but it can only offset their magic. However, the witch awakening not only gives them a wide range of ability, but also boosts their physical power and mental reaction speed. Even their appearances would become more beautiful than ordinary people. They essentially could be regarded as a new mankind. The more brutal the oppression becomes, the more intense the resistance will be. How much damage would be caused to Grey Castle if the witches started and lead a riot? Because the church gave birth to the hatred, once they lost control, it would be likely that the hatred would turn against all the residents of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Roland didn't want to see that happen. So, he needed to start from Border Town, and lay down the structure to contain both sides. Later, he would need to extend the structure to Longsong Stronghold, and in the end to the whole kingdom. He was creating a world in which common people and witches could coexist. Chapter 45 Conspiracy, Part 1. During the night of the new moon, the silhouette of Gerald Wimbledon could be seen near the walls of the city of Grey Castle. After his few months of stationing at Hermes came to an end, he was now finally back, he thought. The long journey left him totally exhausted, but he was still vigilant of his surroundings. He reined his horse to stop and motioned his deputy to go and inquire about the situation. If everything went as planned, the scholar Anstur should have had all of the guards replaced with guards loyal to Gerald. When his deputy gave the signal, the replaced guards would let down the side door of the drawbridge. Gerald was wide-eyed, and was staring forward, out of fear that the guards would overlook the signal. The truth was that he hadn't waited very long, but for Gerald it felt like time froze, and he had to wait forever. When his eyes had already ached to their breaking point, he finally saw a short flicker in the distance, 2 short flickers at the bottom of the wall, and then 3 times above the wall as the answer, signaling that everything was going as planned. Gerald had to take a deep breath before giving his troops the signal to march forward. Seeing this, he already believed himself to be only a step away from the throne. Gerald rode shoulder to shoulder with his deputies through the side door in the wall. Behind him were more than 20 men of his cavalry following him. No one spoke a word, the only sound which could be heard was the pulling of the reins to move the horses slowly forward. The walls of the city were built out of stones from the fallen Dragon Mountain. Under the illumination of the torches, the brown and dark red stones made the wall look like it was overflowing with blood. The entire wall was 20 feet wide, and during the construction of the biggest wall in the world at that time, more than 1,000 hard laborers, masons, and slaves had to die. In the minds of the people, this city was known as an impregnable fortress, but now Gerald and his men were easily crossing the walls, conquering the city with units from within. Somehow, he had to think of the church's new holy city. Would their more ambitious and absolutely impregnable walls also fall due treachery from within? Your Highness, I have already waited a long time for you here. Gerald could hear Anstur's voice through the gates. There, the scholar was already waiting for him with a small troop. Seeing Gerald appear, Anstur quickly dismounted and bent down to bow. Gerald pushed his distracting thoughts aside. He was probably too excited, making it impossible for him to restrain his emotions, but he let his imagination run wild. You have done well. Did you also replace all the palace guards? I was going to, but then an unexpected problem appeared in the plan. Your Silver Knight, who had already agreed to help, was unexpectedly transferred to the south exit 3 days ago. Until now, we haven't had time to switch the new guards with our guards. Gerald frowned. This meant that he could not take 20 soldiers with him into the palace. Gerald himself wouldn't be stopped, but the guards would never let this many armed people into the royal palace. Let it pass, split the team into 2 parts, and come with me to the palace door. Keep the door under good guard and don't let any outsiders hinder me on my way. He hesitated for a moment to make up his mind. Although the plan had changed, the situation was still under his control. Naturally, at night guards would stand outside his father's chamber, but as long as someone could distract them for a moment, he was sure to cut them down with his sword. Inside the city, everything looked the same as it had been when he left. Although he was now walking through the city at night, he was still able to recognize every street. This was his territory, there existed no doubt. Everyone jumped off their horses and marched rapidly forward in the direction of the palace. When they arrived at the door, his more than 20 soldiers spread out according to the new plan, lurking outside the palace. It was just like Anstur had said, except the guards were surprised as to why the prince wanted to speak with the king so late at night. However, after hearing Gerald's bluff about having to discuss important matters, they directly opened the door and let him enter. After all, he was the eldest son of the king and the first heir to the throne. Anster and Gerald went together through the garden and the halls of the palace. In front of the palace was the residence of Wimbledon, 3. Anster raised his torch and waved side to side with it. Immediately after that, a guard appeared out of the shadows and knelt on one knee, pleading, "Your Highness, please, come with me." Gerald became irritated, he smelled blood. Didn't Anster say that they had replaced all the palace guards? He looked through the shadows of the flames and took a good view at the man. He was indeed a familiar person, a knight who supported Gerald in the fight for the throne. This gave him a little peace of mind. What happened? Had someone entered the castle? It happened earlier this evening, Your Royal Highness. His Majesty had summoned a maid for this evening, but she came exactly at the moment of the changing of the guards. The other replied, "Please be assured that we have handled the situation well." He summoned a maid? His father had not touched a woman for a long time, since the death of his mother. Gerald was a little surprised, but now he had not the time to entangle himself in such a trivial matter. So, he nodded and said nothing more about it, and instead went into the castle, followed by his guards. Even with his eyes closed, Gerald could find his way through the castle. He had lived here for more than 20 years. Where there was a secret passage, where there was a secret door, everything was crystal clear for him. However, the purpose of this trip was to persuade his father to pass the throne to him without bloodshed. So surreptitiously sneaking into the palace was meaningless. He had to get rid of the guards stationed outside of his father's chamber. Then, he could let his father fully understand his situation, so that they could sit down and talk seriously about the ownership of the right to inheritance. If he could not convince him, Gerald Wimbledon took a deep breath and gave a hand signal for his followers to stop, then pulled out his large sword and took it in his hands. At the end of the corridor was a bronze door, which was the only entrance into the palace. The door to the bedroom was at the end of the corridor, behind the bronze door. Usually, 2 or 3 guards would be stationed here, but this would be the first time in the history of the palace that the entrance to the king's bedchamber would be unprotected. Gerald first opened the door enough only for a small slit, then he slid in with the side of his shoulder, quickly entering the room and taking a battle-ready position with his sword, but inside the room it was totally quiet, and there was nobody speaking. At the same time, an intense smell of blood entered his nose. The thought of premonition flashed through his mind. Then, he directly ran towards his father's chambers. There, Gerald saw a staggering scene. His father Wimbledon III was sitting in his bed only wearing his nightgown, and his upper body was leaning on a pillow. His robe was open, and in his chest stuck the hilt of a sword. Blood trickled down his belly and soaked the quilt. Standing beside his father was actually his brother, Timothy Wimbledon. How is this possible? Gerald stood in place, totally startled. Just like you, brother, Timothy sighed, I really didn't want to do it. He clapped his hands, and a large number of armored soldiers rapidly entered the room, surrounding Gerald. This was a chess game and I wanted to finish it in accordance with the rules. Brother, do you know why I couldn't? If you have to blame someone, blame third sister. From the beginning she didn't intend to follow the rules, but of course, you did. Otherwise, why would you rush back to the king's city after hearing Scholar Anster's prediction? Seriously, if you didn't come, I really would have been helpless. Anster. Gerald grit his teeth and looked at Anster, enraged. Out of fear, Scholar Anster stepped backwards. While raising his hands he said, I didn't lie to you when I said the star of apocalypse has begun its arrival. It metaphorically hunts everyone who has stepped away from the right path, but it also has the meaning of downfall. Gerald now fully understood. From the beginning, he had fallen into a well-designed trap. The smell of blood in front of the castle was probably not left by a maid, but instead it was his silver knight who was removed instead of transferred like they had said. However, his biggest point of despair was that Scholar Anster, who had taken care of him for longer than a decade and had taught him how to read and write, had chosen the second prince in the end, just like his father. Timothy Wimbledon, he was a son like Gerald himself, but Timothy alone got all the attention of their father. He got the best territory allocated to him, so it was totally unexpected that he would be the one to strike first. "You're the devil from hell." For a short moment, anger flashed within Timothy's eyes, but it soon disappeared. "Do you really think so? Dear brother, if you were unable to change our father's choice, did you really intend to stop there and go back? Do not cheat yourself." Chapter 46, Conspiracy, Part 2. Gerald didn't know how to reply. The only thing left for him to do was to drag his own brother to hell with him. However, after some time he calmed down and asked, "Do you think you can get rid of me by telling your lies?" "Get rid of you? No, that wouldn't help me at all, dear brother. I was helpless, I had to do it." Timothy's tone remained calm, as if he was only stating facts. "If I had honored father and waited 5 years, I was afraid that I would have had to face third sister's pirate fleet. You know what she has been doing recently, right?" Gerald shook his head and felt a stabbing pain within his heart when he realized how great the distance between himself and second brother had become. He remembered that his brother was very clever from an early age but wasn't good at writing, shooting, or fighting. As long as he had an opportunity to deliver a slash to Timothy, he could behead him. "She set up her own army, brother. Really, I admire her. She had even begun to organize it before father gave the order to fight for the throne. This was something even I didn't expect. We got along so harmoniously during our childhood, so how could it have developed like this? Why do we have to kill each other for the throne?" Then, he took a step towards Gerald and asked, "Take yourself for example. I'm afraid that you now want to split me in half with your sword, right? I know you do, brother, since you told me before that when you want to kill you get a frightening look in your eyes." Timothy sighed. "I will bluntly tell you, I had to end this fight for the throne beforehand. Otherwise, if I had waited for 5 years I would have had to face Garcia's fleet. She has already controlled Clearwater for several years, and has made it a city suitable to handle business and the recruitment of soldiers, unlike Valencia, the city of Golden Harvest, which is only good for business and not suitable for rearing soldiers. I need an army strong enough to withstand Third Sister's fleet, which isn't something I can achieve when I can only depend on a trading city. Gerald Wimbledon, tomorrow you will be sentenced to trial because of the assassination of the king and your absence from your territory. I, on the other hand, will travel back to Valencia during the night so that I will be there before the news of father's death spreads. I'll be deeply heartbroken, and will accept the throne only because I, as the second prince, am the duty-bound inheritor. Anyway, I will become the king while you will be sentenced to death by the guillotine." "You!" Gerald roared, enraged, and attacked his brother. However, the distance between him and Timothy was too far, so his sword was intercepted by 2 knights who then slashed at him in return, and a sword pierced his calf. Gerald lost his balance due to the sudden injury and fell on the ground. The guards tightly swarmed around him and pinned him to the ground so that he could not move. "You want to hold a trial? Do you think so lowly of me? I will tell everyone about what happened. I will let all people know what kind of monster you are." "Of course I will not allow you to do that, brother," Timothy patiently declared. "The alchemic workshop has invented a drug named Forgotten Language. It uses the modulated poison of the sand lizard from the southern border and is mixed together with milk. After drinking it, you won't be able to emit any sound. Rest assured, you won't feel any pain, but the flavor is mellow and it's befuddling. If you have to blame someone, then blame our third sister, the genius. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be forced to do this." Timothy waved his hand towards the knight commander, who gave his salute and led Gerald out of the palace. The other guards also left so that the last remaining people were Scholar Ansgar and Timothy. "Your Highness, since your taking over the throne is already settled, I will call you Your Majesty from now on," said Ansgar as he bent down. "You have done well. When I sit on the throne of Grey Castle, I will honor our agreement, but after I saw how miserable my brother was today, I think some provisions should be added to our agreement to ensure my safety." The scholar's look changed immediately. "Your Majesty, you mean dash. Rest assured, I just do not want to be betrayed." Timothy pulled a small pill from his pocket. "This must have been so much for you to handle." Maybe you should take this pill, it will dissolve after 7 days. This should be enough time for me to travel to Valencia, getting the sad news, and then to travel back to Grey Castle. Later, when I become king, you will become the chief astrologer like we had agreed, but I do not want the others to offer you a higher price. Your Majesty. You have to be joking. Scholar Anster's face became pale and his look became pained. But in the end, he grit his teeth, and eventually swallowed the pill. Smart choice, said Timothy as he nodded with satisfaction, you may go. When the palace was deserted, the prince's face darkened. He grabbed the porcelain that was placed on a small table beside the bed. Several sounds of porcelain shattering could be heard. So, the guards who were stationed outside immediately rushed in. Your Highness? Get out! He shouted. Yes, the guards quickly lowered their heads and went out, closing the door behind them. Damn, this wasn't how I had planned it. Timothy hadn't planned to kill his father. With Wimbledon III's favor, he only wanted his father to take notice of Garcia's actions and stop her. His older brother Prince Gerald, on the other hand, would be a pawn within Timothy's hand. Timothy had thought that this plan couldn't go wrong. By controlling Gerald's mentor, Scholar Anster, Timothy could manipulate his brother from the dark. Within the Astrologers' Association, Scholar Anster's status wasn't high, but when Anster wrote some letters to Gerald, the first prince was quickly hooked. All this went exactly like Timothy had planned. His elder brother was strong in battle, but he wasn't good at thinking, but he still wasn't willing to hand over the throne. With each letter they exchanged, Scholar Anster would increase the ambitions of Gerald, guiding him along the path Timothy had prepared. When the last letter with the astrological predictions was sent, Timothy secretly returned to the side of the king, informing him that the first prince may come to pressure him into abdicating the throne. There was no doubt that once this matter was confirmed, the king would immediately imprison the prince out of rage or even sentence him to death or exile instead. Then, King Wimbledon would have to focus on his other children, and when he saw that Garcia was actively developing her military forces, she would inevitably become a second eyesore for him. But, who could have thought that when Timothy had revealed the news, the king would only smile, pull out his personal dagger and directly stab himself in his chest. Everything happened so quickly that Timothy had no chance to intervene, he could only watch his father die. He slowly sat down beside the bed. In the first moments after the incident he thought that this was all an illusion. His father's final smile was just like a nightmare, causing his hair to stand on end. Timothy went through the whole thing over and over again, even inspecting his father's body, but he still couldn't find a single clue as to why his father had killed himself. He also thought about the idea that it was simply a double, but he couldn't find any flaws in this situation in front of him. Even the remnants of his father's old wounds were exactly the same as he remembered. Seeing that Gerald had arrived to meet the king, he calmed down. With this, he could push the blame for King Wimbledon III's death onto the first prince, and then he could use his own identity as the second prince to inherit the throne. After a smooth coronation, he would no longer be restricted to his own territory. Then, he could mobilize forces throughout the whole kingdom to pressure Garcia, forcing her to give up the harbor of clear water. It seemed that the ending was better than it could have been, but Timothy still felt deeply uneasy. As if he was led by an invisible hand, who was already able to control the war of Greycastle's upper nobility, but Timothy himself knew nothing about it. However, at the moment he could do nothing else besides claiming the throne, so he had no choice. Timothy Wimbledon swore to himself that if he ever found out who was the cause, he would let them know what happened when they angered a king. Chapter 47 Market Circulation. For the last week, it was fairly calm for Border Town. Iron Axe and Brian both said that the strength and number of the demonic beasts would gradually grow with the progression of the months of the demons. So, taking advantage of the situation where the pressure on the line of defense wasn't strong yet, Roland once again sent a boat with or to Willow Town. Since the steam engine was put into use for mining in the North Slope mine, the number of miners had been reduced by half, but the production had steadily improved. Now, it had been restored to the level of production from before the collapse. Using a machine to do the job saved a lot of manpower. Meanwhile, under Roland's orders, the mine production systems had undergone a preliminary reform. The former fixed payment for each day was changed into a variable pay. He let Barav put together a statistic about last year's average amount of ore produced daily. With this, he could set a standard, and everyone who mined more could increase their pay. An increased number of gemstones would result in a big reward. This move effectively increased the workers' enthusiasm for mining, so the mine became a bustling area. Roland naturally wanted to do more with his ore, now that he had more ore in hand. In addition to the plan to put a second steam engine into production, he also intended to manufacture a number of manual lathes. This lathe can be seen as something historical. It was commonly seen as an essential machine for implementing other tools. The anvil can be regarded as the most primitive tool. It was used for manual fixing and creating. It was better used to create, because using it to fix was really too inconvenient. Thereupon people would often try to fasten their product or place it in a recess on a table to fix their processed parts. For example, the early matchlock and flintlock gun barrels were placed into a recess on the anvil to be pounded out by hand. Later, manual creation became too slow to meet demand, so they needed tools to increase production speed. The lathe could be used according to different purposes, the tools could be fixed according to each need, and the manual and machine processing could be used together. So, the lathe could effectively improve the strength of pure manual labor and could be changed for every weak point. Roland also considered a manual milling machine. Although the milling machine had various functions, he wanted to mainly use it in order to process involute gears, so its architecture could also be simplified correspondingly. With a slot for a fixed tooth plate and a rotatable steel disc, customized cutting gear could be easily manufactured with Anna's help, by grinding off and polishing the top layer after it got heated to a red-hot state, erasing the slag on the iron, and then immersing it in water to harden it, it would become a highly rigid custom disc. After the key problems were solved, Roland immediately gave Carter the order to hire 2 carpenters, who would build him a milling machine. Meanwhile, Anna continued to manufacture other metal parts in the castle backyard. Roland had to say that with Anna's help, metal processing had become as easy as forming clay, especially after she had mastered the retrieval of her flame. At the moment she was pre-treating small items, forming their rough shapes within her hands. Seeing Anna take an iron ingot in her hand, melt it without further help and shape it into the form she wanted caused Roland to sigh in wonder. If he hadn't been able to employ a witch, Roland thought, achieving his production program would be delayed by more than a decade. 2 days later, the first simple milling machine appeared in the backyard. This time Roland wasn't idle, drawing the gears could be regarded as his job. He designed a set of gears to be used for speed control and stabilizing the steam output. The corresponding tooth plate's design was already normed, and Roland could only wait until the milling machine was completely assembled before they could start with the production of the gears. Using gears wasn't a new thing. Most of the mines in this world used a winch mechanism to drain the water, which was built out of wooden gears and pulled by animals. The chief knight finally felt satisfied. Last time, His Highness had done so many unfathomable things, but this time he could understand what the prince tried to achieve. Roland also gathered 3 blacksmiths with their apprentices, who would learn how to use the milling machine together. After all, he could not personally operate the machine every day, so it was necessary to train a group of professional workers. After everyone respectfully bowed, Roland began to demonstrate how to use the milling machine to process the gears. Roland didn't mind acting as a teacher in front of everyone. In fact, what else could one do in this era? Plus, while doing this, there was no one who could criticize his manners, so he could operate the machine without any pressure. The chief knight was in charge of pouring hot lard into the machine as lubrication. Naturally, in this age there were no oil lubricants. Replacing it with lard was a bit of a waste, but it was still better than nothing. After drenching the disc, the lard would fall into a pot which was placed under the machine. With this, the lard could be reused several times. Roland first placed the lower milling stone in accordance with the design he had engraved beforehand. Then, he set the tooth gear above it so that the tooth gear, the milling stone, and a wooden wheel were in one line. The wooden wheel was driven by a pedal and its power was transmitted to the lower millstone by a leather belt. Then, he put his hands down to gently stabilize the disc handle, until the lower millstone and the slowly moving tooth gear were at a 90 degrees angle. Because the material of the tooth disc was iron and the lower millstone was out of steel, cutting out the teeth marks was not very difficult. Due to the hot lard, the yard was soon filled with a tasty smell, but because the blacksmiths and their apprentices hadn't had meat in a long time, they had to swallow their saliva when smelling it. After the demonstration, the contract was soon signed. Border Town's commerce was still in the initial phase, but calling it an industry was out of the question. No matter if it were the steam engine or the lathe, there would be no phenomenon where the people would run to the store, striving to be first or fearing to be the last to buy them. In this day and age, most people were not aware of the enormous significance they represented, as well as the potential commercial value they possessed. As such, Roland could only take the initiative to promote the use of these machines. Roland specifically wrote in the contract that the blacksmiths who used the milling machine were required to process at least one set of gears each week. The required materials would be provided by the castle and the processing cost was set at 10 silver royals. At the same time, the blacksmiths had to pay a weekly fee of 2 gold royals. The milling machine was not given to them for use free of charge, but was rented out to them instead. After entering the months of the demons, the blacksmiths would usually have a lot less to do. So, this time when they had the chance to make money, and it was even under an order from His Highness, there was naturally no blacksmith who had any objections. Meanwhile, Roland told them that this was only the first milling machine. In the future, he would produce several, one after another, and if they were interested in one, they could apply for it in the town hall. Your Highness, why didn't you directly write a processing fee of 8 silver royals in the contract? Asked Carter, puzzled, after the blacksmiths had left the backyard. Although these two figures are the same, they don't contain the same meaning, Roland explained. This is probably Border Town's first commercial leasing contract, so I had to set an industry norm. The chief knight rubbed his forehead. The fourth prince seemed to be talking rubbish once more, but Carter was already used to it. As long as he pretended to listen carefully, His Highness would continue to explain it. A good beginning is always important in order to form a virtuous circle. I am the only one who currently needs to buy the gears, so I have to provide the tools while they provide the manpower. They will also get paid. In the future, when there are others who have a demand for gears, they will realize that having their own tools will be better than renting the machine and earning the remuneration provided. When Roland spoke up to hear, he paused for a moment and then said, in this way, when they see something new, they can first rent the machine and decide later if the market is big enough for buying their own machine, and if not, they will just continue renting the machine. This is a virtuous circle. Chapter 48 Assembly. While Roland, full of interest, was talking about implementing a fair trading system, the sound of distant horns could be heard. The patrol team would only blow the horn in the case that they couldn't cope with the current situation, alerting the town to assemble soldiers. Roland and Carter looked at each other surprised, and then immediately walked out of the castle backyard, where the guards had prepared horses. Roland directly mounted his horse and rode with Carter and his men in the direction of the walls. When they arrived at the wall, they saw that all members of the militia had already climbed up the wall and had taken their places, setting up a forest of pikes. Seeing this gave Roland a feeling of relief. The eggs hadn't been a waste after all. Looking northwest, Roland could see a group of black shadows approaching Border Town. He reckoned that their numbers were over 20. Iron Axe left his defending position and trotted over. After giving a salute, he said, Your Highness, this group of demonic beasts nearing us seemed to be slightly strange. Strange? Are you saying that they would normally not act as a group? That's not it, Iron Axe explained. If they were to pack animals before the fall, then they would still retain that habit, such as the wolf species. But this kind of species doesn't belong to this kind. They normally wouldn't act this way. They seem to be on a mission. Earlier the hunters had already seen the beasts killing each other. The demonic beasts were only a mutation of their former kind. Their actions would mostly be similar to their original habits, but at the same time their desires would become stronger. In a sense, the intelligence of a demonic beast was lower than that of a wild animal. Because of their manic temper, they even crossed dangerous areas that they would normally never cross. Roland carefully observed the group of demonic beasts. He could see really big and small beasts and could distinguish at least two different kinds of beasts, one kind wolf and the other bison. Species which would normally kill each other had suddenly learned that they had to work together to accomplish something. Because they still had to pass through some obstacles and traps set up by Iron Axe, they slowly crowded together in front of the center of the city wall. Vanner felt his hands become damp with sweat, his grip holding the pike had become somewhat slippery. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was looking at him, he secretly wiped his hands on his clothes. The hunter captain repeatedly said, "You have to relax, take deep breaths." Vanner repeatedly tried to do this, but still could not stop his accelerated heartbeat. He had already lived in the West for more than a decade, and he had always heard of the evil doings of the demonic beasts. Since the beginning of the months of the demons, the occasionally arriving demonic beasts were all shot down by the hunter squads, so he slowly lost his fear of the demonic beasts. He even thought of himself as a brave and battle-hardened soldier, but today, facing so many demonic beasts for the first time, Vanner's legs still trembled. He reminded himself that he was chosen by His Highness as a vice-captain, so Vanner tried to show a calm appearance, and kept the defense position. The group of demonic beasts was now close enough that he could make out their appearances. Running in the front was one demonic beast of the bison species. On its head it had two arm-thick horns, it looked just like a black ram. The hair growing on its back seemed to cover it tightly like a cloak. When it was only 30 feet away from the wall, Vanner could feel the ground trembling. He licked his dry lips, and waited for the captain to issue the command to thrust. Then a loud bang could be heard. The bison demonic beast actually didn't reduce its speed, but hit its head straight against the wall, totally crushing its head and splashing black blood everywhere, painting the wall black. Vanner didn't even have the time to breathe. The bison was immediately followed by two wolves, which jumped up off of the dead bison's back. Thrust out. Hearing the captain's command, Vanner subconsciously thrust out with his pike, even though the wolf species wasn't rushing toward him. The effect of this thrust was clearly not as good as their thrusts during their training. Some thrust their pikes many times in succession, and some people who saw the wolves jump thrust their pikes only once, while others did not react for a long time even after hearing the command. As a result, only one wolf was driven back and the other jumped through a gap in the pike forest and landed on the wall. "Keep the formation," yelled the captain once more. Although Vanner would have liked to turn into a bird and look at the situation where the wolf had jumped on the wall, Iron Axe had emphasized many times during their training that when something broke through and came behind the front row, taking their attention, the front would turn into the most dangerous area. So he stared straight at the next group of attacking beasts with his eyes, and gripped the pike as strongly as he could. The elite hunter squad was clearly better trained than the normal militia. Even before the wolf had landed, the hunters had already pulled out their cutlasses. Iron Axe was the quickest of all. He jumped directly in front of the wolf, only one step away, raised the butt of his gun, and firmly smashed it on the wolf's waist, hitting the wolf when it was still in the air so that it span many times in the air. Whether it was the strength or the defense, after the demonic beast's mutation, both were significantly improved. Such an attack clearly had not caused too much damage to it. The wolf could still stand up immediately after its crash, and bare its sharp teeth. Unfortunately for the wolf, Iron Axe's muzzle had already arrived at its head. Bang! The demonic beast's skull exploded and its brain matter flew everywhere. Without its brain, the wolf took one frail step backwards and collapsed while twitching. "The beast is dead, continue to hold your positions." "My stomach dash." Someone loudly screamed in despair. Vanner could see it in his peripheral vision. He saw a comrade leaning against the wall, tightly clutching his stomach, with blood-stained hands. His intestines are flowing out. The other wolf had rushed the wall up again and had clawed directly at him. "Help me. Damn, someone take out some cloth to press down on the wound." It was a chaotic scene. Other demonic beasts, like a wild boar, also rushed towards the wall. Despite its rough skin and flesh, the boar was so close that it had become a hedgehog due to the crossbow arrows shot by the hunters. Everybody don't panic. Roland thought, if Nightingale were here, she could have saved them from some trouble. Then he shouted, have you already forgotten what you learned during your training? How do you treat injured people? Handle it according to regulations. Hearing the prince's shout, Vanner immediately woke up and remembered his duty. As a vice-captain responsible for a segment of the wall's defense, he was responsible for organizing a rescue whenever someone was injured. He ordered 2 of his subordinates, you two, hurry and carry him towards the medical center, quickly. According to their previous experiences, the subordinates believed that this person would not survive. However, His Royal Highness had once said, it's one thing to do something and not be successful, but doing nothing is forbidden. As a vice-captain of the militia, Vanner needed to give priority to the implementation of orders and regulations. When the wounded comrade was carried away, order was finally restored on the wall. This wave of demonic beasts was seemingly large, but only a few could threaten the members of the militia on the wall. The hunters shot the rest of the demonic beasts down one by one. Seeing this, Vanner could finally breathe relieved. Even though the whole battle had only lasted half an hour, he felt empty and had no strength left. However, at this moment, the person responsible for lookout of the demonic beasts shouted again, my God, what is that? Vanner could also see the new beasts. Although it was still a long distance away from the wall, its outline was still clearly visible. This beast was really a monster. Vanner swore, even if 10 oxen were piled up in front of this monster, they couldn't compare. Only the experienced Iron Axe could immediately identify the newcomer. He had to take a deep breath to calm himself down. There was no doubt that this was a hybrid species. The militia was in trouble. Chapter 49 Mixed Species. Roland rubbed his eyes in disbelief. What the hell was this? Was this still within the scope of the biological variability of a demonic beast? What he saw was hard to describe with words. Even monsters in horror films were not this absurd. From afar, it looked like a giant turtle with 2 heads, but from close up, it was actually 2 wolf heads. Roland thought, was this a test specimen from Dr. Frankenstein? It was almost as tall as the city walls, its body was 7 yards long, and it had a total of 6 legs, which were stumpy and shaped like a rhinoceros legs. However, 1 foot was the size of at least one adult torso. The head, unlike the 2-headed monsters in various monster films, they weren't yelling at each other, biting each other, or trying to show who was the boss. Instead, they were just hanging down, and their eyes had a wooden glaze. It was like a zombie which was brainlessly moving forward. However, the demonic beast's most striking feature was the shell on its back. The shell's surface was dark brown and covered with algae, and it had a special hardness. It was just like a turtle shell, covering the turtle from the front to the back. If this monster could also shrink back into its shell like a turtle, it would be really hard to get rid of it. However, Roland didn't worry. A demonic beast this big had to be slow, so it was destined to be a target. Even if the firearms couldn't penetrate its shell, it was still possible to shoot the heads that were sticking out. If it intended to hide in its shell, then they would have to turn it upside down with explosives. Your Highness, this is a hybrid species. Iron Axe nervously leaned over and explained, now I can understand why the demonic beasts of different species work together. They seem to be under the control of the hybrid demonic beast. So it was like a lion which commanded sheep? Roland nodded. So this is a completely different beast than the one you met last time? It is also my first time seeing this kind of hybrid species. Although it looks bizarre, you can't get careless. As long as it's a mixed species, it will always be hard to deal with it. It will soon enter the range of our archers, so try to first kill it with bows and crossbows, ordered Roland. At this moment, since it was still lightly snowing and a strong wind was blowing from the north, the weather wasn't suitable for archery. However, 2 hunters of Iron Axe's personal squad were still confident that they could kill the beast. They climbed up the watchtower, tested the wind and then fired their arrows into the air. The 2 arrows seemed like they had grown eyes. They rose to the highest point and then, under the influence of wind and gravity, fell at an almost vertical angle onto their target. Just as envisioned, the arrows bounced off the shell. In Roland's brain it even sounded like a ricochet. Seeing this, the hunters hurriedly inserted their next arrow on their strings, and let loose a second wave. Finally, this volley received a result. This time, the impact area was in the front part of the monster, so one arrow precisely entered into the head of a wolf while the other arrow was entered the neck of the other head. However, the demonic beasts didn't roar in anger or speed up its charge, it just stopped for a short pause, tucked its head into its shell and then continued to slowly move forward. This change left everyone stunned. With this, the demonic beast just looked like a tank. Its body was as low as possible above the ground so that even a better shooter wouldn't be able to land an arrow. "Take your guns," Roland ordered. Now, the target was only 50 feet away from the wall. Even if the guns weren't carved rifled flintlocks, he didn't worry that they would miss. Carter and Iron Axe immediately went near the edge of the wall, laid the barrels of their guns on the horizontal frame of the wall, aimed, and fired. While a burst of white smoke was drifting away from the rifles, Roland could clearly see the bullet hitting the shell and splitting away some debris, even opening a small hole within the shell. However, the mixed species seemed to be unaffected, as it continued to maintain its original speed. It seemed that this layer of armor belonged to the strength category of biological carbon's intensity, thought Roland. Unfortunately, the lead balls were still too soft, so they were easily deformed and were not suitable to penetrate thick armor. So, those 4 rifles alone to break the mixed species armor was quite unrealistic, so the only option left was to use explosives. Iron Axe agreed with the prince's judgment. He immediately ordered his deputy to get the explosives as fast as possible, because the demonic beast had already reached the walls. They didn't feel the earth tremble like it did when the demonic beast stomped toward the wall. Instead, it unexpectedly began to smash its shell against the wall again and again, just like a high-frequency rotary hammer. Suddenly, stone chips began to fly everywhere and a number of cracks spread along the bound cement at a rapid speed. Rough walls were highly resistant to compression, but the tensile and shear resistance performance of the walls were very poor. That meant that the wall's ability to withstand the shock of vibration was almost zero. The people standing on the walls could feel a strong vibration, and soon, a shrill sound of friction was delivered to the ears of all the people standing on the wall. With this, the wall had begun to give up under the mixed species attack. However, its impact hadn't stopped. Instead, it started to move again, and soon the whole front half of the beast's body was embedded into the walls. The militia standing on the part of the wall with the cracks had already fled, and the invisible nightingale grabbed Roland by his waist and jumped down with him from the top of the wall. If at this moment someone was staring at the prince, he would see the prince's feet hanging above the floor, just like a ghost. When Vanner arrived carefully carrying a package of explosives, he was surprised to see that there was already a 9-foot-wide hole within the wall, and the demonic beast had already stepped through the wall, but was still maintaining its previous speed of slowly moving forwards. "Hurry!" Iron Axe shouted, "Light it and put it at the foot of the demonic beast." Although Vanner's hand were shaking, his mind unexpectedly became clear and every detail of his training with the explosives emerged within his mind. It was a different version of explosives than used during the training. To reduce costs, the explosive was now placed inside a wooden box filled with debris from the mine. At the same time, the ignition design was also optimized. It used a flint and copper wire type ignition. If this failed, the kit also contained normal ignition leads. He hurried to tear away the oilcloth and opened the bag, where he then got to see a copper string. When he exhausted all of his body's strength to pull the string, he could hear a sizzling sound coming out from the box and white smoke began to rise up. This was the sign of a successful ignition. To slow down the burning time, the lead wire was soaked in salt, only needing the time of 10 breaths to explode. When Vanner saw white smoke rising up from the box, his world turned quiet around him. He had already witnessed the power of this thing. If it exploded in his hands, he was afraid that not even any pieces of his own body would be left. 9 breaths. Banner could hear his own heartbeat, as if it wanted to give him a countdown. Step by step, he went in front of the demonic beast, placing explosives under the beast. 5 breaths. Now that it had built up so much pressure, nothing could stop the explosion now. 3 breaths. Banner turned and ran. 2 breaths. Once breaths, he could only hear a muffled sound. Banner felt the shockwave and the world became noisy again. He turned around and could see a lot of white blasted up from under the shell. That was the snow shot into the air from the explosives. At first glance it looked like a diffused misty flower. The demonic beast finally stopped, but before it fell, it crashed into the ground, as if it couldn't afford to hold up its heavy carapace any longer. Then, black blood surged out from under the carapace, soaking the ground around it. Oh! Seeing this, the crowd suddenly burst out in cheers. Banner fell down to the ground, only now discovering that his clothes were soaked with sweat. It was finally over. When everyone thought this, the sound of the horn resounded throughout Border Town again. Once more, a horde of demonic beasts was marching toward Border Town, trying to destroy it. Do you feel better now? Anna patted Nana on her back to comfort her. Anna's stomach was also turned upside down, but in the end she was still able to swallow it down. When the wounded man was carried in, he was still conscious and was constantly repeating, "Help me, help me." Seeing the expression of despair and begging within his eyes left the people around him feeling heartbroken. Seeing the man's intestines hanging outside from his belly, Nana couldn't hold back and threw up. Even so, she still insisted on treating him. After placing the intestines back into the belly of the patient, Nana laid her hands above the wound, closed her eyes and began to heal the patient's wounds. After the healing, Nana let out an exhausted sigh, leaned against Anna's shoulder and whispered, "Today was the first time that the horn was blown. Do you think that His Highness is all right?" "I do not know." Anna shook her head. She wanted to go over there to see the situation at the walls with her own eyes, afraid that Roland could be in trouble. She was even a little envious of Nightingale. Her ability to act without being noticed was very convenient. At this moment, a booming sound could be heard from the direction of the wall and everyone could feel the earth slightly trembling. Brian jumped off from the bed he was sitting on and began walking somewhat restlessly through the room. "Young man, you have to relax," said Sir Pine, while calmly wiping his sword. "A knight isn't allowed to lose his cool before he enters a battle. This will only make bad things worse. Moreover, this situation is still far from bad." "I'm very sorry, sir," replied Brian, ashamed. "I just thought that there had to be a desperate battle on the wall, but I'm here, wasting my time, so I find it difficult to feel at ease. After all, it is my duty to defend the town." "Perhaps." Sir Pine shrugged his shoulders, "but it's not your responsibility to guard the town. After you heard that His Highness will canonize you as a knight after winter, you should first understand that the first principle of the knight is allegiance. Now, he needs you to protect Anna, so now your responsibility is here." When you put it like this," for a moment Brian hesitated, but then he seated himself on the bed again. But soon they heard the horn blow a second time. It was even more rapid than the first time. It just felt like thunder would roll over everyone's heart. Sir Pine frowned. "Anna!" exclaimed Nana, shocked. Sir Pine turned around and saw that the witch was running directly toward the door. Brian immediately went to catch up with her, placing himself in front of her. "You said you want to guard the walls? Now is your time," said Anna in a calm and autocratic voice. "As long as you follow me on my way to the wall, you will not be contradicting His Royal Highness' command." Hearing this, Brian was really shocked, but he raised his head to look quizzically toward Sir Pine. What an amazing girl, thought the Baron. There was nothing wrong with what she said. In addition, His Highness does not require her to stay in the medical school. He had also heard from Nana that Anna could summon flames. So if the current situation was really tight, letting a witch join the battle would maybe be the deciding factor in reversing the situation. Coming to this conclusion, he nodded, "Protect her well." "Yes, sir." Brian yelled loudly and suddenly felt his blood burning. Seeing the two leave, Nana asked, "Father, will you not go with them?" "My battle is here, at your side, my good girl," said the Baron with a smile. "Whether it be the demonic beasts or the devil himself, I will never let any of them hurt you." The distance between the medical center and the wall wasn't far, so Anna and Brian could trot all the way along the stone path toward the east wall. When the two were finally close enough to see the outline of the wall around the central watchtower, they saw that the situation has become very problematic. A great hole was opened within the wall. Roland was being shielded by his personal guards, but several people were still on their way down. A demonic beast shaped like a bear came sprinting towards the militia. It was unstoppable, and when it hit the soldiers stationed at the front, they were all sent flying. When someone saw Anna with her strange attire running towards them, the person yelled at her, "Hey, it's dangerous here, you have to leave immediately." Anna turned a deaf ear towards him and went directly towards the hole instead. After the demonic beast had fought its way through the militia, it turned around and rushed towards Anna. Brian stepped beside Anna, ready to protect her. He lowered his body and slashed out with his sword, but the crazy demonic beast had no intention to dodge, and hit the edge of the sword with its front legs. The sword was immediately sent flying, but at the same time, the momentum was so strong that the beast's front legs were cut open, and were even broken. It rolled around on the ground, screaming and looking like a dehydrated fish that was struggling to breathe. No one dared to come near it because they were afraid of getting hit. However, Anna walked beside the demonic beast, put both of her hands on the ground, and suddenly the demonic beast burst into flames. The beast turned into a ball of coal. When flames suddenly erupted within the crowd, Roland saw that Anna personally had come. He was immediately bathed in cold sweat. "I hadn't planned for you to show yourself like this." He had originally intended to let Nana lay down the groundwork. After most people had accepted the presence of a witch, he had planned to announce Anna's presence in public. However, now every previously made plan was destroyed, so he immediately turned and said, "Don't worry about me, go and protect her. Anna must not be lost." She was an important figure in the industrial development of his town, so if she were injured it would bring an immeasurable loss. "I know," said Nightingale, "but please also pay attention to your own safety." Anna went to the front walls with the fracture. When Roland's guards saw the girl in strange clothes coming towards them, they immediately stepped aside and let her through. Now, she stood among the soldiers, and spread her arms wide to shield them. Sending vines of flame from her hands, she let them climb up the wall along the destroyed section. Everyone's mouths were gaping open when they saw the scene. They dared not to believe their eyes when they saw a wall of flames rising up and slowly filling the gap in the wall. This wasn't an illusion. All of the guards had to step back because of the high temperature. The surrounding snow was rapidly melting, and formed clouds of white mist which then rose up. The demonic beasts also feared the flames. They immediately fled to the sides, and only occasionally one or two of them would try to break through the wall of fire, but no demonic beasts could step through the wall of flames. "Everyone get back on the walls!" Roland loudly shouted, trying to grasp the opportunity. "Get back into the formation. Hunter squad, fire at will." Then, he himself grabbed Carter's gun, laid it on the wall, and began to shoot down the demonic beasts. Seeing the prince himself attack motivated all the people present. After all, in this age, seeing nobility or the royal family taking the lead role and fighting alongside the militia was seldom seen, so seeing this greatly enhanced the morale. The crowd began to chant the slogan, "Guard Border Town. Fight for the prince," while at the same time maintaining the line of the defense and holding their formation. The fighting continued until the sky began to get dark. Only then were all the demonic beasts in front of the wall killed. Slowly, the wall of flames began to disperse and Anna, totally exhausted, wiped the sweat off her forehead. Then, Roland saw an incredible scene. Roland's personal guards laid their fists on their heart and bowed in the direction of Anna. Then the militia, as if they were infected by the mood of the guards, also gave their salute. Incredibly, no one shouted or cursed her with evil words, they only watched her silently. After the war, all of Border Town was quiet. Seeing a kind of incredible power which was never seen before for the first time was indeed terrifying, but this power was used in their favor. When seeing it used for the confrontation with their greatest enemies, their fear gradually disappeared, replaced by trust and gratitude. Roland's heart went crazy while walking towards Anna, but when he was by her side he found her totally pale. She was walking unsteadily, and was on the verge of collapsing. "Are you okay?" he worriedly asked her and held her by her shoulder. Anna saw the prince safe, gave him a forced smile, and then fell down in his arms. Chapter 51, Her Majesty the Queen. Sunlight fell through a narrow window into the room and was reflected as dark red stripes on the wall. There were only a few places within the kingdom where you could still see the sun, and the port of clear water was one of them. In this place, the months of the demons, with its cold wind and strong snowfall, only had a tiny bit of influence. With the exception that the Black Sail fleet couldn't leave the harbor, the entire city was still as busy as usual. The city governor and harbor master Garcia Wimbledon was sitting at her square table under the window, seriously studying the contents of a letter. Her gray hair was caught in the sunset and had a golden touch. Her face produced shadows from the light, adding definition to her facial features and giving her a unique charm full of heroic spirit. Ryan had been standing by her side for quite a while. Although she had already exceeded her usual time for reading a letter of this length, he still chose to wait quietly for a little longer. He didn't want to interrupt the silence. Eventually, Garcia sighed softly, put the letter down, and then told him, "My father is dead." Hearing this, Ryan was startled, and he had to ask, "What?" "My father, Ollie Wimbledon, King of Grey Castle." She rarely repeated anything she said, he thought, because when he usually asked her again, she would merely look at him like he hadn't said anything. However, she really wasn't kidding, right? The king is really dead? Ryan opened his mouth, trying to say some comforting words, but in the end he just asked, "How did he die?" Fortunately, she didn't care about this. She was the daughter of the king, the governor of the port of clear water, and the commander of the Black Sail fleet. She didn't need anyone to comfort her. "The letter says that my brother Gerald killed my father, but he was caught by the guards. He didn't commit suicide to escape punishment, so in the end he was put to trial by several ministers. There he was sentenced to death by beheading." That doesn't sound right. Ryan subconsciously couldn't believe it. "Of course that isn't the truth," said Garcia, expressionless. "It's true that my first brother is a relatively stupid man, but he isn't so foolish to go on a suicide mission. If no one led him in that direction, he would never do such a thing." "Someone framed him?" asked Ryan. "Let me guess." The third princess closed her eyes and thought for a moment before she answered. "Someone probably put this detailed plan in order, and tempted Gerald by saying that they would help him, bringing people into my father's courtyard. This must have been arranged by someone in advance, including the eradication, exchange and bribing of the guards. But those aren't areas where Gerald has his strong points, since he is just too lazy to arrange something like this. The rest would be simple. It was only important to acquire a person who had Gerald's trust, but would still betray him in the end." Ryan could add nothing. After all, these were only guesses. What truly happened was not important. The important part was only the result. He believed that this was also the thought of the third princess. Sure enough, Garcia opened her eyes and continued, "I am 90% sure that it wasn't the first prince. He was a person who only knew brute force. His brain is one big muscle, so it was regular that he was fooled. Only." When saying this, her voice had some spunk. "My second brother would be this cruel." "You mean Timothy Wimbledon was the true culprit? Apart from him, who else would know so much about Gerald? Also after this matter, he is the person with the greatest gains." While speaking, Garcia was unconsciously tapping her finger on the table. "Even a blind person can see this. But he was father's favorite, so he really didn't need to do this." Her Highness was truly angry, Ryan realized. Seeing the princess, this heated up, was truly rare. It seems that even though she had been complaining that her father was too eccentric, in the end she still didn't want to see her father dying like this. Ryan was able to understand this feeling, more or less. In a large family, the younger generation would always have such a feeling towards the master of the house, a mountain they would have to surpass, both revering and hating him. If she was right and this was truly planned by the second prince, then his actions could indeed be considered bloody and cruel. But why would he do this? Because he was afraid of me. Garcia took a deep breath, trying to control her emotions. He is afraid of my black sail fleet. Realizing that Ryan wouldn't answer, she continued to explain, Timothy seems to have a spy in our city, which in itself isn't surprising. I myself also have arranged eyes and ears in Valencia. When he discovered the existence of my black sail fleet, it became easy for him to imagine what I would do later. Valencia isn't able to support an army that is capable of facing my fleet. So, he came to the conclusion to use Gerald as bait to get what he wanted. So you mean, he wants an army? He wants the throne, said Garcia. With my father's death, and now even Gerald's death, he has become the first heir. I am afraid that he will press the ministers to crown him as fast as possible. Only when he becomes Wimbledon 4 will he be able to mobilize all his vassals with their armies. As she said this, she shook her head. However, as I have already said, as father's favorite son, he really didn't need to do this. Wouldn't that be worse? Asked Ryan, worried. If your second brother gets crowned, won't he declare the battle for the throne finished and call you and your siblings back? What will you do then? Garcia answered as if she felt it was completely beneath her dignity. This step would be too straightforward. Just because he was our father's favorite son, it doesn't mean that he will have the support of the ministers, especially because of his move to kill the former king. Although he pushed the murder on Gerald and may be able to fool the civilians, I estimate that it will take a long time until he will be able to grasp full authority in Grey Castle. So. She looked cunningly at Ryan and said, I have to change my plan a little. Ryan immediately fell on one knee and said, I'm willing to serve. Garcia stood up, walked to the window and spoke to Ryan with her back to him. The first thing he is bound to do after he claims the throne is to deal with me. However, his only possibility to pressure me is to command Joe Cole, the Duke of the Southern Territory. I estimate that the latter will use the king's mourning period to delay sending out his troops. That old fox has always been reluctant to do business where he would make a loss. At most, he will summon his feudatories and send them out to surround Port of Clear Water. Garcia paused slightly and then spoke further. However, this move will give us unnecessary trouble, so we will set sail tomorrow. Sail? Your Highness, don't tell me you want to. Eagle City lies more inland and is almost undefended. We can reach the town of Clear Spring by using the tributary of the San Juan River. From there we will only need 1 day to arrive at Eagle City. After we seize Eagle City, the entire Southern Territory will be under my control. The situation after Timothy claims the throne will be different than what he thinks it will be. When Timothy wants to know the Duke's progress, but discovers that the whole South is under my control, I really want to see his face. But, you also said that Wimbledon 3 just passed away, and following this, What, do I need to shed some tears first? Garcia turned around, the light of the sunset fell on her body and covered her with a red veil. Her face was hidden in the dark, only her eyes were reflected by the light. The emotion shown within her eyes was as solid as a boulder, Ryan thought. Even if she is angry or feeling regret, she will never show sorrow. Showing sorrow wouldn't be suitable for a king or queen. No, you don't need to do that, Ryan seriously said. Garcia nodded with satisfaction. Go and tell the captain that I want to speak him. Since Timothy was unwilling to wait until the end of the 5 years, I will not let him down. After I conquer Eagle City, I will declare the independence of the Southern Territory. All this didn't matter to himself, he thought. Garcia will always find a solution for every possibility. Once she decides on a path for herself, she will walk down the path courageously. This was where her charm laid and was one of the reasons why he followed her. Yes, Your Highness. No, Ryan corrected himself, Your Majesty. Chapter 52 Heart of Fire. Roland knocked on the door, and when he heard Nightingale's response, he entered the room. The windows in the room were closed and had thick curtains. They were only open during the early morning and evening to let in fresh air. At any other time, the windows were closed to keep the room warm. The only light in the room came from 2 candles at the end of the bed. The candles burned quietly and threw out many crisscrossing shadows throughout the room. Roland went towards the bed. Seeing that the woman resting on the soft pillows and bedding still had her eyes closed, he sighed softly. "Is Border Town's defense still holding?" asked Nightingale while coming over to Roland and handing him a cup of tea. "At the moment everything is going smoothly," answered Roland while taking a small sip, but then he gave her the cup back. "From that day on, a big group of demonic beasts like last time hasn't attacked us. Also, all of our injured members of the militia are now healed and back, ready to fight. Their fighting passion has become somewhat high." "What is with the damaged part of the city wall?" Carl rolled logs under the carapace of the mixed beast to move it towards the hole in the wall. "There, he will use a capstan to get it up and use a wooden frame to hold it upright, making it a part of the city wall." Roland knew that Nightingale was trying to distract him by questioning him, so that he wouldn't worry himself too much. However, when he stepped into the room, all his attention would always stay on the woman who was lying in bed. If we say that the last time we confronted the large-scale invasion we obtained a victory worthy of pride, there is no doubt that the biggest contributor for the victory was Anna. If she hadn't used her wall of flames to block the gap in the wall, the consequences would really have been unthinkable. However, she hadn't woken up since she fainted in his arms. "It has already been 1 week, whispered Roland. Theoretically, if a person laid in a coma for 1 week without food or water, with no possibility of supplying her with nutrition through external measures, such as injection, the body's functions will shut down and the brain will gradually go into shock and die. However, Anna did not have any signs of poor health. In fact, her appearance now was better than when she fell into Roland's arms. Her cheeks were rosy, her breathing was smooth, and when Roland put his hand on her forehead he could feel that she had a normal temperature. Everything showed that Anna was at full health, but she wouldn't wake up. "This is also the first time I have encountered such a situation." Nightingale stood at Roland's side, shaking her head while explaining. "She depleted all her magic within her body, but now her magic power is already at the point of saturation, even more rich than it has been in the past. If I did not calculate it wrong, today at midnight will be her day of adulthood." "Do you mean she's going to be an adult while in a coma?" "No, she will die while in a coma," Nightingale said bluntly. "You must use your will to overcome the suffering on your day of adulthood. If your resistance is broken, the bite of the witch's magic power will irreversibly destroy her body." Roland moved a chair next to the bed and sat down. "I remember that you once said that when facing magic backslash, no matter how painful it becomes, you will always stay conscious and clear-headed. Either you will be able to cross this hurdle or you will choose to terminate your life." Indeed, it is exactly like this. Within the Witch Cooperation Association we also had someone who believed to draw support from being unconscious when passing through the bite of the evil spirit, only having to bear the torment once a year. Nightingale hesitated but then continued. "She said that she relied on alchemic substances to sleep, but in the end it was meaningless. When the moment came she was immediately devoured by the magic without any chance to resist." "The pain does not slowly increase?" "No. When your time arrives, the pain will strike you just like lightning, but how long you have to resist varies from person to person. My sister was not strong enough, but she trailed off." Roland understood what she meant. Not knowing how long they had to suffer the pain was already a kind of torture in itself. Not knowing how long they have to resist, it was similar to being on an abandoned ship in the middle of a heavy storm. It would be easy to let people give up the desire to live on. During the moment of silence, Roland felt a hand on his shoulder. "During my homeless and miserable years, I had seen too much death. I saw witches being treated like cattle, hanged, burned, or tortured to death just for the entertainment of the nobility. The only way for a witch to survive was to live far away from other humans, living a cloistered life. I do not know where the holy mountain is located, but in our hearts it is an unattainable paradise." Nightingale's voice became softer than it had ever been in the past. "But Anna is different. In addition to the help we sisters can give her, I have never seen someone else being so concerned about a witch as you. She is needed by people, she is valued and treated like a normal person. Your Highness, Anna has not even made it through her adulthood yet, but she has already found her holy mountain. However, this was not the outcome Roland had hoped for. He closed his eyes, and recalled the scene when he had met her. She was barefoot, and was only wearing tattered clothes. She had been living in a cage, but there was not the slightest hint of fear in her face. Her eyes resembled an unpolluted lake surface, clear and calm. She was the flame, but she wasn't flickering like a flame. Memories began to appear like the pictures on a film reel. I have satisfied your curiosity, sir, so can you kill me now? I have never used my power to hurt someone else. I just want to stay near you, Your Highness, nothing more. The demon's bite will never kill me, I will beat it. Are you dreaming? I'm not going anywhere. Roland had to restrain his surging thoughts and whispered, I will stay here and accompany her until the last moment. I will also stay, thank you. After dinner, when Nana heard that Anna would go through her day of adulthood, she insisted on staying. Roland set aside a room for her and her father, who would accompany her during the night. Like this, Roland and the two witches were sitting beside the bed, quietly waiting for the approaching midnight hour. Regarding Nightingale and Nana, they would also have to face the demon's bite this winter, but fortunately their magic awakened on different days. Otherwise, the three witches would have to suffer their test of life and death at the same time. Roland estimated that if that was the case he wouldn't be able to stay calm in the room. The town had no clock tower, so with only the light of the candles, the passage of time became blurred. Cold wind blew against the window, so from time to time they could hear the screeching wind. When Roland felt a trace of weariness attack his heart, Nightingale suddenly said, It has begun. Only she could see the magic flow within Anna's body. She saw that it became restless, and the cluster of green flame became unusually rich, but the white incandescence in her center turned dark, while all of the irritable magic converged inward. It seemed to be pulled towards the center while struggling and rolling wildly, but it was of no use. Roland couldn't see these changes, but he was also aware that something was wrong. The candle flames began to shake, even though no wind was blowing inside the room. The light emitted by the flames got darker. It seemed like all the shadows were swallowed by the flame as it changed its color. The orange-red glow turned into a jade-like green flame. He looked at the woman lying on the bed, but she was still sleeping, without even the slightest changes on her face, as if all this had nothing to do with her. At this point, the flame of the candles almost disappeared, but the flame was not extinguished. The green flames were just like phagocytic cells eating up the orange flames, plunging everything into darkness. But soon, the fire was lit up again. However, this time, the flame of the candles had turned into a pure green. The three people sitting around the bed were submerged in green light, looking quizzically into each other's eyes, but in the end no one could understand what was happening. However, at this moment, everyone's eyes turned towards the bed. They had heard Anna groaning. Anna slowly opened her eyes. Anna, Roland was shocked, she woke up? Anna blinked a few times to clear her eyes, but then she smiled at him, stretching out with the open palm of her right hand, reaching for the prince. A mass of green fire was leaping up from her palm, quietly burning. Roland didn't know why, but he could understand what Anna wanted. He hesitated for only a moment, but then he slowly inserted a finger into the flame. The anticipated burning sensation didn't come. Instead, it was just like being wrapped up in lukewarm water. It felt soft and warm. Chapter 53, Heart of Fire, Part 2. The day after Anna woke up, Roland and the others bid Nightingale farewell. Although the reason why is still unclear, but Anna is probably the first witch who has spent the day of awakening without pain, Nightingale excitedly said before leaving. After Nightingale had followed Roland for a long time, she got used to the term awakening when describing the transformation of witch. When I come back, I will bring my sisters with me. At that time I hope you will accept us, just as you had accepted Anna. This would be exactly what Roland wished for. With only Anna's ability he was able to revolutionize the forging process, allowing the town to see the dawn of the industrial age, so what would he be able to do with a bunch of witches? Of course, he also had to take into account safety issues, since crossing the mountains during the months of the demons was very dangerous. But apparently, Nightingale was quite eager to bring her sisters back because she said, "During this winter, many of my sisters will have to face this difficult period. If I can bring them the news only a little earlier, I might be able to save at least some of my sisters. Rest assured, normally the demonic beasts aren't able to find my whereabouts." Finally, Roland asked, "When do you have to face your day of awakening?" Nightingale turned around and mounted her horse, at the end of winter or early spring. While leaving, Nightingale waved back towards the prince, "Do not worry about me. In the previous years, the bite of the demons gotten lighter and lighter for me." This answer gave Roland something to think about. He had already thought about how Anna could survive her day of awakening. After all, Anna said afterwards that she hadn't felt any pain. This was completely against the Nightingale's concept. The power of witches come from the devil, so the power is contaminated by evil. This could be seen when their blood turned black and flowed out of every pore. Their skin would look burnt, leaving the body in a miserable condition. This was unshakable and irrefutable evidence. However, since the beginning, Roland had thought this was wrong. He rummaged through the memories of the old fourth prince, but he didn't find any proof that God or the devil existed in this world. Since it isn't a divine power, it shouldn't be regarded as a standard to distinguish between good and evil. In fact, even if there were gods who would frequently interfere with the mortal world, it was still the believers who choose their own camp. Only then would the gods get their power, rather than vice versa. According to the Nightingale's description, a witch would gather the magic gathering within her body. However, when the magic had no way to be released, would it damage its own vessel? Roland thought that the possibility of this theory being right was very high. After all, most people who were confronted with hostility and pressure would certainly choose to hide their own abilities, pretending to be normal while hoping to leave the battlefield alive. This would lead to the point where before they reached their adulthood they would rarely have the opportunity to use their magic. Roland certainly did not think that his castle would block the demon's bite. He asked Anna if she had an unbearably painful experience before this. If anything was different during this year, then it was because she came to the castle and was able to use her magic almost every day. So, with Nightingale's final answer, his guess was confirmed. Her stealth ability wasn't very noticeable, so she could even use it often. In addition, she had been forced into training her ability by other people and was forced to use her ability recklessly. Thus, the backfire of her magic power only had little impact on her. When Roland were back in the castle, he immediately started Nana's enhanced training. If no one was injured while defending the town, she had to treat a variety of small animals. If he was able to confirm his theory with Nana's help, the significance for the witch community could be described as earth-shaking. The devil's curse would change into a present of the divine. As long as he could ensure that his territory was a safe haven for witches, endless masses of witches would come to border town. He didn't know how, but after the last attack everything was back on track, without any big waves. Roland began to intensify the production of his steam engine too, but also gave Anna enough time to get familiar with her new capabilities. He built another shack in his backyard, but this time it was covered from the snow. It was used as an experimental area, since he still felt it was safer to build one in his own backyard. Nightingale had previously said that witches, when reaching adulthood, would stabilize their magic power and probably produce new branch capabilities. However, until now he hadn't seen Anna show any new capabilities, but her control of fire had become completely differently than before. No, whether or not it could be called a flame was still a question. Roland thought the former flame was still in the range to understand with common sense, but now the green flame wasn't understandable with common sense. He named it Heart of Fire. It could exist away from Anna but at the same time stay influenced by Anna's will, capable of changing its shape. Just as she was doing it right now, the Heart of Fire was burning on top of an iron panel 2 yards away from her, swaying lightly back and forth, as if it was saluting her. However, Roland knew that Anna was still controlling it. Normally, the Heart of Fire had a temperature close to one's body temperature, but when Anna wanted to heat it up, it would instantly raise its temperature to a comparatively higher temperature, changing its color from a jade-like green into darker green. Similarly, it could also turn into a big cluster of flames from a small flame, or even change its movement speed. Unfortunately, it couldn't be moved too far away from Anna. After repeated testing, they discovered that when the flame moved more than 5 yards away from Anna, it would disappear. Another new feature of the Heart of Flame was that Anna could call more than one flame, but until now she had barely been able to operate the 2 flames simultaneously. Even so, the situation at the wall was described as calm. The demonic beasts would still appear one after another outside the wall, but there was no presence of a mixed species. Without them, it was nearly impossible for the demonic beasts to break through. Just like Roland had said, they became stronger and faster, but they were still just beasts. Due to the huge wall length, they had to direct the demonic beasts to the middle section of the wall, so that the militia with only 200 members could hold the wall. So in addition to his daily routine of patrolling his territory, Roland had plenty of time to spend on construction. He had set aside a site south of the castle, and planned to use it as living area for the arriving witches. As the investor of the project, he appointed Carl as the head of the workers, building a batch of 2-story brick houses. At the same time, a reasonable and beautiful layout was considered, allowing easy entrance and exit, and a good drainage system strove to create a well-planned neighborhood. He also considered whether the witches would be distributed to the old areas or only the new urban areas, mixing them with the common inhabitants, but after thinking about it, he gave up the plan. Although this would help accelerate the acceptance of the witches by the normal people, before he could erase all the misunderstandings, the consequences were likely irreparable. After all, the witches only had a certain influence within the militia. In addition, there was also no guarantee that the witches brought by Nightingale were harmless and behaved people. Most of them had suffered the pain and suffering of the world, so Roland was afraid that the situation wouldn't be so easy to summarize. After all the witches couldn't be like Anna and Nana. Also, when the witches lived in one area, it would be convenient for collective management. Before they came, Roland had to draw up all the relevant rules and regulations. Until now, Roland had no experience he could refer to. After all, he had neither the personnel nor capacity of the National Security Agency, nor was he the creator of the Avengers, who knew how to manage a group of people and had the abilities for it. He was without any better option than to press for a basic system used for personnel management by companies, slowly wading through the river by groping for stones. Of course, Roland knew that this program had loopholes, but as a pioneer, what else could he do? Retracing his tale and only staying in border town could take decades to be able to touch the threshold of industrialization, but he wasn't a cultivator, so how could he wait for decades? Wanting to lead this era into the next, being at the forefront of the reform, it was necessary to have a spirit of adventure. Just when he was recording these thoughts on paper, Barav opened the door and walked in. Shaking the snow of his coat and saluting the prince, he informed him, "Your Highness, a messenger of Longsong Stronghold is coming." Chapter 54 Bad News. Petrov didn't think that he would visit Border Town again so soon. He had not intended to travel during the cold winter. In particular, he had not intended to leave his warm house when the demonic beasts were ravaging the countryside. However, when Duke Ryan personally gave him the mission to deliver this letter with hot news to the hands of the fourth prince, he had no way to refuse. He certainly knew the contents of the letter. In fact, the entire aristocracy in the Kingdom of Grey Castle were discussing the amazing news. The King of Grey Castle had fallen because of murder committed by his eldest son, Gerald Wimbledon. Immediately after the news spread, the second prince stepped forward, announcing that the kingdom could not survive without a king. Since he was previously the second in line, he was now the heir and with this would be the next king. However, this behavior wasn't approved by everyone. It was said that the process of Gerald's trial was very strange, because during the whole interrogation, the prince was only seen a few times, but he hadn't said a single word and his hands were tied tightly. So, most ministers were hoping to look into the matter thoroughly before deciding who would inherit the throne. It was also rumored that the second son Timothy Wimbledon played a self-guided drama, where he was the real killer and was only placating his sad look, but in truth couldn't wait to inherit the throne. In the end, the debate about the true culprit was meaningless. Since the second prince had the full support of the imperial prime minister, he could temporarily take over the position of king, so he was still able to grasp the right to be the supreme ruler of Grey Castle. At the same time he took over the throne, he issued an order to recall all of his competitors. The battle for the throne was over, so the king's sons and daughters should return to Grey Castle before the end of the winter after receiving the prince's edict. Based on the ruling of their conferred territories during the last 6 months, the new king would then be officially canonized. Petrov could clearly detect the urgent mood within the letter. Through this, Timothy Wimbledon could firmly secure the throne. Everything depended on the reaction of the king's other children. If they behaved and gave up the fight for the throne, and returned to Grey Castle, Timothy would naturally become the undisputed Wimbledon IV. All documents sent to Border Town would be transferred through Longsong Stronghold first. When Duke Ryan saw the recall order, his first reaction was to snort disdainfully. The former king was always fair towards the nobles, and gave them lots of freedom, but as for the second prince, his ascension to the throne by force would need to be incomparably harsh. This could be seen when Gerald was sentenced to death by the guillotine, so now, no one would go back to Grey Castle, fearing to get the same treatment. However, in the eyes of the 6 families of the Longsong Stronghold, this was a well-timed command. 2 months ago, Earl Elk set an unauthorized plan into action and made Duke Ryan very unhappy, especially since the plan failed. The prince's reaction was very intense, sentencing Dmitri Hill to death by hanging. With this, both sides could be regarded as having in public and acrimonious conflict. Duke Ryan had originally intended to wait until the end of the months of the demons so that he would have a free hand to solve the awful problem, but now he had this document. With this, he had a legal option. Roland Wimbledon was called back by the soon-to-be king, so when he left, Border Town would naturally be owned by Duke Ryan again. However, if he didn't go back to Grey Castle, Duke Ryan would be able to send him back by force, everything under the name of the new king's banner. In the end, the Duke didn't care which hands the crown would fall to. Thinking of his return to Border Town, Ambassador Petrov naturally didn't feel very comfortable. Last time, he had vowed that by his next visit he would bring a new trade agreement, but in the end the result was that they were attacked by the Elk family. Now he was back, bringing bad news once more, whether it was the death of his father Wimbledon III, the new king, or the recall order. Petrov believed that the 4th prince didn't want to see any of them. Since the kingdom of Grey Castle laid in the south of the continent, the way to Border Town was smooth sailing because even in winter, the river didn't freeze. From time to time, Petrov went to the window and took a look outside. During the journey he didn't see any person dead, starving, or even fleeing, which indicated that Border Town had yet to fall. This made him a little surprised. After all, the last time he had visited, he had seen that the wall had yet to be built. Petrov didn't have much confidence in them since they were building a stone wall out of mud. Then, an even more surprising situation appeared. He saw a boat with the banner of Willow Town hanging on its mast slowly passing them on the right side of the river. This would usually be a familiar scene, but not during the months of the demons. Even when Border Town was fighting with the demonic beasts, they were still able to do business? Without transferring all of their mining workers towards defending, how could they withstand the brutal attacks of the monsters? 3 days later, Petrov's vessel arrived at Border Town's pier. It was still the same dilapidated wooden dock, but now at its end was wooden shed. After the ship docked, 2 guards emerged from the shed, staring at the boatman's every move. Petrov immediately understood what Roland intended with this arrangement. Obviously, the 4th prince didn't want anyone to secretly leave the town by the river. After identification by the guards, someone immediately brought him a horse and then took him to the castle while accompanied by guards. Just like the previous time, Prince Roland Wimbledon met Petrov in the living room. Moreover, although the time was not the regular meal time, the prince still commanded the attendants to prepare a rich meal. Grilled ham, dried fish slices, an unknown salad prepared with wild herbs, as well as butter, bread, and vegetables that could be seen at any dinner party were prepared. It seemed that the prince liked to talk business during dinner. While Petrov had such thoughts, his hands did not stop for a single moment. After all, in the last few days he hadn't had much of a chance for a meal. Even his own honeysuckle family, when they had no dinner guests, would basically eat only bread with bacon. After dinner, the dessert was served. During this time, Petrov respectfully handed over the letter. Roland took the letter and opened the wax seal with his dining knife. Out of sight, he rolled out the letter and took a quick glance, then he became stunned. The king was dead? Roland had no feelings for this nominal father at all. Since his crossing over, he had been living in border town, so he had never seen his father face to face, let alone that in the fourth prince's memories of his father had only blamed and resented him. Because of this, he felt that he was caught in a very embarrassing situation. Should he have a sad look on his face? Reading the following contents, he could smell a conspiracy. Wimbledon III was murdered by his eldest son? Under the identity of the new king, the second prince announced the end of the battle for the throne and immediately ordered all of his siblings back to Grey Castle? Roland coughed and raised his head, just to see Petrov's apologetic eyes. So, he thought, I'm afraid Duke Ryan will be happy regardless what I do. No matter whether or not I comply to the new king's orders, both are a dilemma of their own. He didn't bring the trading agreement, but instead brought a letter of bad news. I think at the moment he feels very sorry. Roland secretly smiled, then folded the letter again. I got it. Well, Your Highness, then what are you going to? Even if I want to go, I will have to wait until the end of the months of the demons. Right now in the ice and snow, if I'm gone, then what would the people of Border Town do? If it was someone else, Petrov would certainly say something like, do not worry, my Longsong stronghold will help you to handle this situation properly, or any other diplomatic responses. But in front of the fourth prince who he had only seen twice, he couldn't speak carelessly. It was the first time that Petrov loathed his own identity as ambassador. In the end he merely nodded, I understand, should I pass a reply for you? As an answer, Roland called his attendants to bring over a pen and paper. He wrote a quick reply and then sealed it with wax and his own stamp and handed it over to Petrov. The latter glanced at the envelope. It was clearly written to Prince Timothy Wimbledon of Grey Castle on the cover instead of King Wimbledon IV. Petrov thought, now Roland has made his statement. Chapter 55. A once in thousand years opportunity. Roland opened the door to his office, seeing that Berov was waiting for him. Roland threw the letter towards his assistant minister, then sat himself on his chair, with his feet on his desk. If he had not been in the presence of an outsider, he would hum a ditty. Your Highness, it's okay to grieve. Berov began to frown while quickly reading the letter. The death of the king is such a tragedy, and he was even murdered by his own son. This is really a tragedy. I don't know what your Highness should do next. The trial leading to Gerald's death was just too strange. I want to wait and see what my elder sister and my younger sister decide to do, Roland said, but in any case, there are some things we should do in advance, even if we do it only to be on the safe side. Berov looked at the prince, waiting for him to continue. Because of the replacement of the king, the next few months or even years can become turbulent, so the first thing we should do is safeguard our loved ones and family members. What was more important was the fact that the second prince could kidnap these people to threaten them. Now, if he wanted to maintain Border Town's administration and financial affairs functionality, his assistant minister was indispensable. Roland sipped his tea and then continued, you and Carter, as well as your subordinates should all write them a letter. I will have the guards deliver them while they deliver my response to the king, then they will arrange for them to take shelter in other towns. Not in Border Town? Berov wasn't a fool. After 20 years of political experience, he immediately understood the prince's meaning. No, they won't come directly to Border Town. Roland didn't want the other side to use the families of his subordinates to threaten them, and he also didn't want his subordinates to think that he himself would threaten them with their families, so he chose a compromise. He would first bring them to a more secure town, and after he had a strong foothold in Border Town, they could be migrated. I understand. I would like to thank Your Highness for your concern. The assistant minister spoke while nodding in agreement, which let Roland feel relieved. It seemed that his subordinates were intelligent people who could think for themselves. Roland declared, "Another thing we have to talk about is the ore trade. After the last iron ore trade, we will put a stop to the ore trade and sell only rough stones to Willow Town. I need the iron ore saved for our own usage." "That wouldn't be good. As a result of that, our revenue would decline, Your Highness." "Yes, but it will not drop too much. Recently, the miners found a new deposit of gems, so with this we can make up part of the gap," explained Roland. "And winter isn't really the time for business. The peddlers hesitate to come trading when they always have to fear an attack of demonic beasts, so we will most likely only have 2 to 3 transactions during the next 4 months. Thus it is obvious to trade rough stones to make up for the less trade, since they are the more cost-effective choice." "I see." Barav accepted the explanation and recorded the orders down. After his assistant minister had left, Roland called for Carter and told him, "I need to expand the size of the militia, so you will be responsible for it and will give out recruitment orders. You will need to quickly evaluate their abilities, and if you find strong members they will be appointed as team captains. You will also implement the same training methods like last time." "Your Highness, if I train them according to those training methods, I am afraid the new team will need a very long time before they can be deployed to the battlefield. As long as they are stronger than the mob." Roland dismissed his concerns and told him to do what he said. Despite his input, the training level was far away from that of the army. He was afraid that this level of training was only on the level of a college student military training, but sometimes it was only important to have better combat effectiveness compared to their opponents. In addition to fighting against the brainless demonic beasts, most of the time they would fight against a noble's private army, mercenary soldiers, or if needed, turned into a mixed arm. So as long as they used cross-arrow weapons and equipment, even an army on the level of college students would be able to cope with it. After Carter left, Roland could not stop himself from laughing. He did not think that such a fortuitous situation would fall into his hands. It was simply like someone sending him charcoal during a snowstorm or handing him a pillow when he was sleepy. Was this bad news for me? Was this a dilemma? Wrong. He didn't know much about Garcia Wimbledon, but he was sure that she wasn't a woman who would allow men to trample on her. The first prince was sentenced to death in such a short time. Even if there was no insider, she probably wouldn't easily return to Grey Castle only because the second prince had ordered her. It was the same for himself. He would just stay in Border Town, so someone would be bound to come out. Most likely it would be Duke Ryan from Longsong Stronghold, since he was such a restless person. Otherwise, he wouldn't send someone in this horrible weather during the months of the demons, only to deliver the letter to his hands. One day Duke Ryan would want to confront him, since until Roland left Border Town, Ryan could not rest or eat in peace. Choosing to stay in Border Town would be equivalent to defying the new king's edict. If Roland would only wait until the end of the months of the demons, Duke Ryan would in all likelihood, under the name and banner of Timothy Wimbledon, try to teach him a lesson. That was exactly what Roland wanted. If you asked someone what they needed for faster industrialization, the answer would be without doubt people. Large-scale production required a large number of staff devoted to it. After all, a lot of people were needed to drive huge machines. In that time, the term sheep ate people came into existence. It described that when tenant farmers in Britain were thrown off their land to starve so that sheep could graze and produce wool for new mills, turning them into free laborers. The industrial age was a cruel time. So long as they unceasingly invested into the education of the laborers, they could archive a generous payment. The more developed the industry, the larger would be the population. If Roland had a problem, then it would be Border Town's low population. Border Town had around 2,000 inhabitants. Even with the newly invented machines, it was only a small type of workshop. There were not many free laborers, so many projects couldn't be expanded. But from where should he snatch so many people? Should he buy slaves? Not to mention, he didn't know from where he could buy so many slaves, adult slaves would cost a lot of money, and they would have little sense of culture. Buying slaves under the age of 10 and teach them would take too long, granted that he would allow child labor, so he would have to wait for many years. Recruit talented people? To this borderland, how many people would be attracted to this town? And for them, he would need to spend even more than for slaves. Encourage his people to increase the birth rate? Forced marriages? Forget it. He also couldn't hope to get more people from Longsong's stronghold. The kingdom was in a steady state, so if he tried to lay his hands on the surrounding lords, he would become a joke in the future. For the same reason Duke Ryan didn't dare to face Roland openly, he could only take actions in secret. But now it was different. After Timothy took over the throne, he would be eager to have all his competitors disappear. All this could be seen from the recall order. Duke Ryan apparently was able to see this point. Once the old king was gone, and he had the control over the west border, so if he didn't try to enforce his rule it would be strange. This was a long-awaited opportunity for Roland. Longsong's stronghold was already for hundreds of years the business center at the west border, with nearly 10,000 residents. But behind the stronghold lay the big cities, without any strong defense. He would just have to beat Duke Ryan, take over the city, and get a large number of freedmen, and at the same time he could accumulate a lot of wealth. What would be easier than the annexation of the population? What way would be faster to get wealth than to plunder it? This message was just like a beacon to dispel the mist, illuminating the future path of Roland. He definitely would not miss this golden opportunity. Chapter 56, Between the Mountains. Nightingale was slowly moving forward on the mountain path. The path under her feet was only shoulder width. On either side of her was a huge rock wall, separated by 10 feet. But between them was a bottomless ravine and the shoulder-wide path she was walking on, so directly next to Nightingale's feet was a steep cliff and a huge wall out of rock. When she looked into the deep ravine, she could only see darkness. While traveling on her shoulder-wide path, Nightingale was always carefully leaning on the rock wall next to her, trying to avoid losing her footing and falling into the ravine. When she looked up, only a thin shimmer could be seen from the sky, like a silver thread hanging in the night sky. However, she knew that it was just a little after noon. Even during the day, she still needed to hold a torch. The light coming down the cliff was not sufficient enough to illuminate the road ahead. Walking on this path for a long time even gave birth to the illusion that she was walking in the mountains. The only advantage here was that not much would fall down the gorge, despite the cold wind whistling through the mountains and lifting up the fallen snow. Occasionally there were a few natural snowflakes that fell on her head from, and landed on the mountain walls or on the trail, turning into water vapor. Down here, the temperature wasn't the same as it was in the outside world. Occasionally she could see the hot air rising up from below the cliff. If it weren't like this, she wouldn't dare to pass the impassable mountains during the months of the demons. She could hide herself in her own world of fog, but there, it would be still the same temperature. If she were to brave her way through the snow, she estimated that she would freeze to death after an hour of walking. Nightingale didn't want to spend an extra minute down here. She could always feel something in the dark, always watching her, making her blood run cold. If she could, Nightingale would stay in the fog the whole way, but it was a pity that her strength wasn't enough to do that. When she used her ability for a long time, she would quickly become exhausted. Nightingale raised the torch and let it illuminate the opposite cliff. In the faint firelight, she could occasionally see dark shadows on the walls. Nightingale knew that those were caves, which were so deep that light couldn't reach the end of each cave. They looked like orbs of darkness. But on the other side, nearly at the same position, was also a deep hole. It reminded her of the North Slope Mine's rumors, which said that the mine used to be a monster's underground lair, with many forks in the road that extended in all directions, dug out by monsters. The northern slope was part of the mountain range, but it was so far and wide with so many caves. Who could say that the caves weren't connected to the mine? The idea made her shiver. To the west of the impassable mountain range was the abandoned barbarian wasteland. It was known that the impassable mountain range extended for several hundreds of miles, with countless undiscovered caves. Nightingale was afraid that this wasteland could give birth to countless monsters. She did not dare think of going into the caves and only concentrated on moving forward. Finally, she could see a change in the road further ahead. The shoulder-wide path split into two, one leading slightly upwards and the other one leading downwards, leading deeper into the darkness without end. No one knew where this pit led to. While standing on the bifurcation point, the feeling of being stared at had become very intense, as if countless eyes were motionlessly looking at every move Nightingale made, making her have a dry mouth and tongue and giving her a creepy feeling. Nightingale grit her teeth as she opened her world of fog and quickly stepped into it. Soon, the creepy feeling began to disappear. While following the path leading upwards, the surrounding air temperature soon began to fall, but above her head the small thread of silver became bigger. A quarter of an hour later, a huge cave opened up directly in front of her, with its entrance slightly higher than the path she was following. When she set foot into the cave, she could see a faint fire deep within. Finally, she had reached the Witch Cooperation Association's hiding place. When Nightingale left her world of fog, she was immediately detected by the witch in charge of defense, who instantly set up a wall of black smog to block her. However, soon the wall disappeared and a surprised voice could be heard from the darkness, "You're back." Nightingale thought, "Yes, I'm finally back," but when she noticed that the girl had two bands tied around her arm, Nightingale's good mood turned directly into grief. Once again two sisters were. The other's witch's voice stalled for a moment and then she sorrowfully said, yes. Ari and Abby had their day of adulthood 5 days ago and didn't survive it." She forced herself to smile. "It happens often, doesn't it? But let us not speak about them, you have to go back to the camp, Wendy is always talking about you." Ari and Abby, a pair of twins who left their lives in a wealthy family from the fallen Dragon Mountain only to die within the impassable mountain range. Nightingale sometimes wondered if what they did was alright. If the twins hadn't left their town with the Witch Cooperation Association, they could have at least enjoyed their lives with their family, rather than following everyone, wandering from one place to another, without any fixed home. However, when she thought of Wendy, Nightingale's heart was filled with warmth. If she hadn't given her a helping hand when she desperately needed it, she was afraid that she herself would still be living a life as a puppet, always fearing to be disposed of just like every other tool. Yes, she should tell her the news as soon as possible, and she should tell it to all her sisters. They weren't required to hide like little mice any longer. Someone was willing to accept all of them, and there maybe, they could come out unscathed through their annual day of awakening. When she stepped into the camp, Nightingale saw that a familiar figure was squatting near the campfire handling the food. Until now, the other person hadn't seen that she had arrived, so she couldn't help herself and shouted, "Wendy, I'm home." The other witch turned away from her meal and looked towards Nightingale, welcoming Nightingale with her usual smile, "Veronica, welcome home." Wendy was the embodiment of a good woman and also one of the first witches of the Witch Cooperation Association. Now she had turned 30, but still any wrinkles couldn't be seen on her face. She had red-brown hair, which fell straight down, almost reaching her waist, with mature and charming facial features, which gave her the appearance of a big sister. She was always concerned about each and every sister of the Witch Cooperation Association. Whether it be about their daily life or psychological counseling, she would always try to help no matter what happened. If it wasn't for Wendy, there was a big chance that the Witch Cooperation Association wouldn't have gathered so many witches. She was precisely the reason why Nightingale decided to run away from her family when she met her, embarking with her on a journey into the impassable mountain range, trying to find the Holy Mountain. She was also one of the few people who knew her original name. "How many times have I already told you that I'm no longer that cowardly little girl from the past," said Nightingale while smiling and shaking her head. "I'm now a powerful witch, Veronica doesn't exist any longer. You will always be you. Breaking away from your former nightmares doesn't mean to part with important and happy moments of your past," said Wendy softly. "Of course, I'm glad you like your new name. Nightingale, I've been waiting for you to come back, surely you had to suffer throughout the whole journey." Well, Nightingale stepped forward and hugged her friend. "Thank you." After a moment, Wendy opened her mouth and asked, "What happened to the girl? Were you too late to save her?" When hearing her speak of this, Nightingale's spirit immediately began to rise again. She grabbed the Wendy's arm and said excitedly, "No. She did not need me to save her. On the contrary, maybe she is able to save us all." Then she began to describe in detail her experience of her time living in Border Town. Border Town is governed by Lord Roland Wimbledon, 4th Prince of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. He is willing to shelter all of us, and he also promised that one day, that all witches in his territory could live the life of a free person, just like everyone else. Chapter 57, Kara the Snake Witch / However, Wendy wasn't as excited as Nightingale had thought she would be. Instead, she asked in a skeptical tone, "Did he really say that?" "Yes, even before I arrived in Border Town, he had already rescued 2 witches, Anna and Nana. From the beginning, the prince never thought that the power of the witch came from the devil. He said it was our own strength." Nightingale suddenly stopped, realizing that the other didn't believe anything. Good stop, she thought, this isn't Wendy's fault. They will probably only believe it when they hear it directly from the prince, but maybe even then they will doubt it. After all, it would be exactly what every witch's heart was longing for. We witches were oppressed for far too long. Even on the way from the east to the border of the impassable mountain range, we could see many living examples where witches were betrayed and abandoned, without any person who would reach out to them with a helping hand. When thinking about all this, her excitement gradually subsided. Perhaps this trip wouldn't go as smoothly as she had thought. "Wendy, you know what my magic had evolved into on my day of adulthood. In addition to being able to see the magic flow within a person, I'm also able to identify if a person is lying or not," stated Nightingale seriously. "So when I asked him why he would take such a big risk to save us witches, he replied, 'In Border Town we don't care about your background. He just wants all the witches to be able to live as free people. But while doing this, he will become a thorn in the side of the church.'" Wendy frowned and asked, "Even if the prince does not understand what it means, you do know it, right?" Nightingale could not help it, but she began to chuckle loudly. "My initial thoughts were almost the same like yours, so I asked him, 'Do you think you can really achieve this?' And guess how he answered me?" She paused, and then repeated verbatim, "If you do not step out, you will never know the answer." Wendy was surprised when hearing this and had to ask, "That wasn't a lie?" "No lie," confirmed Nightingale. "It sounds unbelievable." Wendy's voice became slightly relaxed. She and Nightingale were already friends for many years, so she couldn't think of a reason why she would try to deceive her. "Yes," Nightingale deeply sighed. If she hadn't personally heard it, since she could verify it with her ability, she probably wouldn't have believed him so quickly. Now in retrospect, just like when they stood on the city wall and talked about it, Roland really seldom lied. During the 2 months she stayed at his side, beside the moment they stood on the wall, he had sometimes tried to deceive her once, but Nightingale was still very satisfied with his answers. After all, she didn't care that he was trying to deceive her a little. Instead, if you would just tell an unknown witch all of your secrets, that would be too ridiculous. Tonight, when we all come together, I want to tell this important news to all of our sisters. Nightingale looked pleadingly at Wendy and said, "And I want you to help me convince them." When the evening came, the witches who were busy outside the camp returned one after another. When they saw that Nightingale had safely returned, the witches became very happy, coming towards her and asking her how she did. Seeing that their arms were wrapped in a white cloth, Nightingale felt heavy within her heart. At the beginning she still casually answered a few questions, but with time she turned more and more silent. But then she began to tell her long story. She talked about how she had sneaked into Border Town, how she met Roland, Anna and Nana, the construction of the city wall, the construction of the steam engine, how they had resisted the attack of the demonic beasts, and finally about Anna's adulthood. Nightingale even took out the drawing of the construction plans for the steam engine, to prove to everyone that she wasn't lying. Most of the witches, after they entered the Witch Cooperation Association, would live a cloistered life. For them, it was difficult to imagine the life in the outside world, so they listened attentively. But when Nightingale said that Anna hadn't suffered any pain during her day of adulthood going through it unscathed, the crowd suddenly began to rage. This was a great concern. the day of adulthood bothered witches for all of their lives, and lead to leading a sheltered and warm life. They even went into the impassable mountain range, losing everything only to look for the legendary Holy Mountain. If what Nightingale said was true, that there was a territory lord who was willing to accept them, who even knew how they no longer had to suffer from the demon's bite, wouldn't that have been even more perfect than the Holy Mountain? At this point, a path began to spread through the crowd, and a witch with a head full of green hair and half of her body plastered with snake tattoos walked in front of Nightingale. When she saw her, Nightingale bowed and greeted her respectfully, "Respected mentor, hello." The witch who came was the founder of the Witch Cooperation Association, Kara the Snake Witch. When speaking with her, all the witches called her their mentor. "I heard the story you just told." When Kara spoke, her voice hoarse and hollow. "Do you want to tell everyone that what we are doing is wrong?" "No, mentor, those are not stories, I mean." Enough, Nightingale was interrupted by Kara, who was waving impatiently. "I do not know what happened to you, but when you went to this border town, it made you say such words. A prince that sympathizes with a witch? It's practically as laughable as sympathizing with a frog." She turned around with a cold smile, and raised her arms in the air shouting, "Sisters! Have you all forgotten how those mortals treated you all?" Not even letting Nightingale say something, she continued to shout, "Yes, that group of mortals, the group of incompetents who pretend to fight in the name of God, who are always aiming a sharp blade or whip at us. If there wasn't a God's locket of retribution, how could they step on us witches? Our ability doesn't come from the devil, instead it is a gift given by God. The one who take charge of God's authority shouldn't be them, but we. Us, the Sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association. The Holy Mountain, recorded in ancient books, is the residence of the gods." What? Nightingale couldn't believe what she had heard, though the leader of the Witch Cooperation Association was always considered as an eccentric. She was strongly attached to the search for the Holy Mountain, with a passion exceeding that of any ordinary person, but she was always very far from madness. Although Kara wasn't as approachable as Wendy, at least she had always treated the concern of her sisters with sincerity. But Nightingale had never thought that she could be so hostile to ordinary people. Could it be that over the past few years she had always been suppressing her hatred and anger? The so-called not to get involved into profane affairs, merely in order to save power, only so that we can one day impose a thunder-like retaliation in the future? Nightingale thought to herself, was that the true reason why Kara hid herself? "We have found a clue to the gate of the Holy Mountain. It is just like it is described in the ancient books. It's only 20 more days until the red moon will appear in the night sky just like a drop of blood, rising from the direction of the Great Sherman. We will eventually arrive on the other side." Suddenly Kara stopped to speak and turned back to look at Nightingale and exclaimed, "You've been fooled by mortals. Since we have been born, we had lived in a huge scam. The suffering during the day of adulthood is a test by God. Only the strong-willed, with indomitable talent and genuine power, can pass it. As for the church," she sneered for the second time, "they are a group of mortals who dare to borrow and act in the name of God. Sooner or later they will have to go to hell. And you, child, now it's time to come back." Kara paused for a moment and then continued, "If you forget those stories you just told, I can forgive your ignorance and mistakes. As a member of the Witch Cooperation Association, you will get help from us, and together with us, you will go on the search for the Holy Mountain, to obtain eternal freedom." Nightingale's heart had turned completely cold. The pain was only a test? That suffering during the day of awakening, the sisters who weren't strong enough to hold on, they weren't worth it, they were only losers? This argument was simply exactly the same as that of the church. While the surrounding witches unexpectedly exposed an expression of resonance, even Wendy didn't come out to express her disapproval. Nightingale suddenly felt dull, and within the blink of an eye, the founder of the Witch Cooperation Association, every witch's mentor, had turned into a stranger. Nightingale shook her head. "So, I'll be willing to take every sister with me who want to leave, but if you decide to stay, I wish you good luck." Just as Nightingale was ready to leave, suddenly a slight tingle could be felt in her lower leg. When she looked down, she could see that a fine, shining blue and black striped snake had bitten her into her calf. This was Kara's magic of the snake. It was silent and she could use a variety of toxins. The paralysis quickly spread through her whole body, so when Nightingale tried to open her mouth to say something, she fell into darkness. Chapter 58 Escape. Nightingale didn't know how long it lasted, but when she woke up, she discovered that her hands were tied to a stake. The same could be said about her waist and feet, they were also tied to the stake. She tried to free herself by struggling, but her body was tied to the pole so strongly that she was totally immobile. The next step was to try using her magic ability, but she couldn't feel the familiar feeling when reaching for her power. She seemed to be also cut off from her magic powers, so she was completely tied up. When Nightingale looked down along her body, she saw that a transparent prismatic stone was hanging down from her neck. "You're finally awake." Kara walked in front of her and began to talk to Nightingale. "What do you think about my petrifying venom?" "Honestly, I had high hopes for you, Nightingale. However, sadly you couldn't live up to my expectations." Nightingale didn't know how to answer first, but then she took a deep breath and spoke reproachfully. "You were actually hiding a god's locket of retribution. Kara, do you still know what you are doing? This stone was originally shackles used by the church to suppress witches, but now even their own mentor used it to deal with her, just like the church." Though what made her even more angry was the callous look on the faces of the surrounding crowd. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with what they were seeing. "Damn it," cried Nightingale at the bottom of her heart, "don't you think that you turned into the kind of person who us witches hate the most? This is only a tool, which will be occasionally used to punish bad girls who won't listen," explained Kara indifferently. "And you, Nightingale, are such a person who need to be punished, or, should I call you Veronica? Born within a noble family, got reduced to a witch, but still thinking about how to climb the social hierarchy. I don't know what you're talking about. You let me down. When Wendy saved you from the clutches of the aristocracy, I thought you would stand firmly on the side of us, the Witch Cooperation Association. But, look at what you're doing right now. When we will soon discover the Holy Mountain, you want to stop us from achieving our goal." Kara shook her head and laughed loudly, but then continued, "Trying to take us sisters with you to the prince? Were you kept captive for too long and now servility has deeply rooted itself into your being, so that you can only live on when you find for yourself a master, or else, do you just want to sell them to the nobles, in exchange for receiving a good position for yourself? Everything I do is for my sisters." Nightingale had to swallow down her anger. After all, shouting would be meaningless, so she said calmly, "I hope that no one will have to die during their day of awakening, hoping that they can live without worrying where they get clothes and food for their daily life. I never intended to stop your plan, but us sisters should have the right to freely choose our own way of life. At the moment Border Town is undergoing tremendous changes. I brought even the construction plan for the steam engine. It can operate on its own, with a nearly infinite force. With this kind of machine, the water within the mines can be directly pumped out, so that people don't need to do it every day any longer." Kara sneered once more and asked pejoratively, "Are you talking about this?" She turned around and pulled a roll out of the stack of parchments and rolled it out, so that everyone could see it. "Although I don't understand everything painted on this parchment, but who would believe that a bunch of dead, cold iron can be pieced together so that it can work independently like a living creature? Do you think we are all 3-year-old children?" She walked to the front of the brazier and threw the roll into the charcoal. "No!" cried Nightingale in vain, only able to stare blankly while the blueprint turned into ashes within the brazier. "My patience has been exhausted, I will only give you one last chance." While she threatened Nightingale, Kara took an iron skewer out of the brazier, whose end had already turned bright red from the heat. "If you plead guilty in front of all your sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association, admitting that you have been bewitched by the aristocracy, I can spare your life, but the whipping is unavoidable. After all, this will be your lesson for cooperating with the enemy. But if you will still be stubborn, I will have to use this iron skewer to pierce your heart, nailing your body at the stake, so that everyone can learn from your wrongdoings." After waiting for a second she said, "Do not miss my last offer of mercy. Tell me now, how have you decided?" Holding the iron closer to Nightingale, so that she could have a better look, holding it so close that she could even feel the scorching heat coming from its tip. If she was still her cowardly self from before, she would have bowed and admitted defeat. But she had already bid farewell to her past self, no longer being that timid girl. Now she was Nightingale, a powerful witch. Even in front of death she wouldn't yield. So she only closed her eyes, awaiting the arrival of her last moment. She didn't know why, but an image of Roland appeared in front of her eyes. "Stop!" shouted someone suddenly. For a moment Nightingale hesitated, but then she opened her eyes. Nightingale could see that Wendy walked out of the crowd and said to Kara, "Mentor, look at the white cloth wrapped around your arm. We already have experienced so many deaths, do you really want to add another one? What, even you are being deceived by her? Wake up, Wendy! What she said are all lies." "I do not know." Wendy shook her head and continued, "I do not intend to go with her to Border Town, but I think that one of the things she said was right. We sisters should have the right to freely choose our own way of life." She turned around and loudly asked the crowd, "Which of you want to leave with her?" No one within the crowd answered her. The scene fell into silence. "So there is no problem when she is leaving alone," said Wendy. "She didn't harm the Witch Cooperation Association, so I really cannot watch you kill her." Nightingale had fully understood the meaning of Wendy's words. She couldn't help but get a sad feeling within her heart. Even Wendy didn't completely believe what she had said. So because of this, she kept silent when she needed her help when trying to convince everyone. But she was still the good-hearted and caring witch. Even if she didn't agree with her point of view, she would still lend a helping hand. After Wendy's remark, some whispering voices could be heard from within the crowd, and then a few people spoke up for her. "Yes, since she is willing to return to the secular world, just let her go. The church and the pain have already taken so many sisters away from us. Respected mentor, please think about her punishment once more." Everyone shut up. Kara raged and shouted, "If I let her leave, what will we do when a second or a third Nightingale appear? Also, if she sells the position of our camp to the church, then we will have nowhere to escape." The voices didn't quiet down, so she lifted her arm to hit Nightingale with the iron skewer. But Wendy was a step faster, producing a strong breeze of wind, throwing Kara onto the ground and stopping her striking attempt. Then she threw a coin into the air, raised and waved her hand, leading the rapid airflow to wrap around the coin and shooting it in the direction of Nightingale. When the airstream came near Nightingale, it instantly disappeared. Yet the coin still maintained its speed, accurately hitting the god's locket of retribution around Nightingale's neck. The transparent and prismatic stone released a hitting sound and instantly broke. "Traitor!" Kara screamed furiously while standing up from the ground. Wendy and belonged to her inner circle and were her right hands, but now one of them had betrayed her. Out of anger, she threw out a shadow snake which flew with its mouth open in the direction of Wendy, biting her ferociously at the back of her hand. At this moment the ropes fell to the ground, still maintaining their wrap-up formation around the stake. Only Nightingale wasn't any longer at her place, bonded to the stake. When thinking about Nightingale's ability, Kara felt cold sweat running down her back. She instantly mobilized all of her magic, creating magical snakes, gleaming with all possible color variations, which then poured out of her chest. Ordering them to form a wall, she herself rushed backwards, but Nightingale was still faster than her. Only one step, just after one step, she already appeared behind Kara. Thrusting her hands forward, the iron hammer, which actually should have pierced her own heart, went straight through Kara's body. Chapter 59 Explorer. Respected mentor. When they saw that Kara had fallen, all the witches around her began to panic. "Idiots!" Ahem, Kara tried to cover the wound with her hand. She could no longer feel her lower body. "Quickly, go and kill the traitors for me." However, at that time Nightingale, who was carrying Wendy, had already turned into fading mist. When they arrived back at the fork in the road, Nightingale realized that Wendy had fallen unconscious and her arm had turned black. The venom was spreading within her. Now, no hesitation was allowed and every second counted. She gnashed her teeth, ripped off the sleeve around Wendy's injured arm and then used it to bind the arm as tightly as she could. Then, she drew a dagger from the sole of her boot and opened Wendy's wound. After less than half a quarter of an hour later, she had cut open Wendy's arm. As long as the arm wasn't cut off, Nana would be able to heal her. When she had done everything she could do, Nightingale took out 2 straps and bound Wendy on her back. As long as Nightingale was able to bring Wendy to Border Town alive, Nana would be able to completely heal her. But to keep her alive for so long, was it possible? She alone already took 3 days on the way here, but now, while carrying a person, she would naturally need longer. If she were to go faster and accidentally slide down the trail, she wasn't sure if she could climb up again. Wendy's arm was still losing blood, she would never last 3 or 4 days, but Nightingale had no other choice. She would never be able to leave Wendy, after all, she was only injured because of her. "Do you need help?" Suddenly, a voice could be heard out of nowhere. Nightingale was frightened and almost simultaneously opened her own world of fog, and assumed a defensive position. However, there was no person in front of her. "You don't need to be nervous, I didn't come to fight." When Nightingale looked up, she could actually see a person flying in the air. Then, she asked, confused, "Who are you?" "My name is Lightning, I just joined the Witch Cooperation Association recently. Since I'm always away, it is normal that you don't know me." She tried to smile easily, "However, I know you, the famous Nightingale, the shadow assassin. Did Kara send you?" No, don't misunderstand me." Lightning slowly came downwards, setting her feet on the earth in the end. "I want to go with you." Nightingale couldn't believe what she heard, so she asked, "What? You said, we should have the right to freely choose our own way of life." Lightning paused for a second and then said, "I choose to go with you, it's that simple." "What is?" Nightingale was already completely disappointed by the reaction of her sisters. Even Wendy hadn't fully believed in her, but now this girl in front of her, she was actually still a child, around 14 or 15 years old, like Nana. She had fresh and neat short blonde hair, a face full of high spirits, and speech and self-confidence that didn't match her age. Also, she didn't wear the usual Witch Cooperation Association uniform. Instead, she wore a set of long trousers tailored to match her personal preferences, with many pockets and patches. This could also be said about her vintage leather jacket. The last part of her attire was a crude-looking belt that was fastened around her waist, only God knew where she had picked it up. At first glance, this just looked like a man's clothing. "You said that there's a machine that huffs and puffs out black and white smoke, and that you can also create stones out of gray powder and even have powder that breaks apart mountains with a thunderous bang. I want to see everything." Lightning was talking full of enthusiasm. "I'm determined to become an explorer who, of course, only goes to interesting places." What kind of a reason was this? Nightingale was startled, and she couldn't make a sound, but even in this kind of conscious, she could still tell that Lightning was not lying. "I do not understand. If you want to be an adventurer, why would you leave the Witch Cooperation Association and join me?" "Not an adventurer, I want to be an explorer." Lightning stressed, "I'm not one of those who are only driven by money, who say that they are risk-takers, but in fact are only doing the dirty work of others. Explorers only act out of interest." "Are you asking why I don't want to be with the Witch Cooperation Association?" explained Lightning confidently, "who are looking for the Holy Mountain, which should be the dream of every explorer. Kara doesn't understand the spirit of adventure, she is completely immersed in the old book, only looking along the road for the characteristics described in the ancient book. She is walking through the mountain range only searching for 2 weathered pillars rising out of the ground. If this is the way she does it, she will never find the real Holy Mountain. My father always stressed the point that an explorer must honestly record everything they see when looking for a fine horse by using only a picture. That's just the way an explorer should handle the matter." Although Nightingale would have loved to know what kind of father would teach such ideas and raise such an absolutely strange daughter, now wasn't the right moment to chat. After all, Wendy's life was at risk. Since she didn't mean any harm, an additional helper would be appreciated. In the end, Nightingale only asked, "Your ability is flying?" "Well, yeah," Lightning nodded and said proudly, "I can even carry you both, and flow forever forward, just like the wind." "Then I will have to trouble you." Nightingale made sure that Wendy was strongly bound to her back and then she held on Lightning's shoulders, and wrapped her hands around Lightning's chest. Really heavy. Lightning grit her teeth, and slowly rose upwards. I think we probably won't be as fast as the wind. Thus, they began their strange form travel. When Lightning was exhausted, she would be carried by Nightingale, who took everyone through her world of fog. When Lightning was physically recovered, Nightingale would then climb onto Lightning's back, so that she could fly forward again. When both of them were exhausted and compelled to rest, Nightingale would find the time to ask her some basic questions, for example, who her father was, or the situation with her family. Lightning said that her father was the world's greatest explorer and that he even traveled across the ocean. He had an ocean sailing fleet and was affectionately called Thunder by his crew. However, she had lost her mother when she was still very young, so she didn't have many memories of her. While on a sea voyage, her ship had run aground and capsized during a storm. Lightning was lucky and was rushed to an island by the ocean currents, but she lost all contact with her father. On the island, Lightning used the knowledge and skills her father taught her. She nearly spent 2 months alone on that island before she had awoken during the winter. With her new ability, she flew westwards across the channel to the south of Grey Castle. After going through numerous setbacks, she joined the Witch Cooperation Association in the end. She felt that as long as she adhered to exploring, one day she would be able to come across a miracle and see her father again, as long as he was still alive. Nightingale didn't gain much useful information from this dialogue. Her ability could only be used to distinguish if the other side was lying, but she couldn't determine the authenticity of the spoken content. In other words, as long as the other person said that the sun was square and didn't doubt it, her ability would still show that they were telling the truth. However, there was actually some information that could be inferred. For example, she must have been born in a wealthy family. Families who were struggling with poverty wouldn't have the time to explore. The fact that her father had an ocean-going fleet was also consistent with this judgment. Therefore, Thunder's true identity was perhaps a wealthy ocean-crossing businessman. Lightning had blonde hair, unlike the descendants of the kingdoms of the mainland and more like the sea people from across the fjords. Wendy had awoken several times. During these times, Nightingale would always try to let her drink as much water as possible, but after drinking, she lost her consciousness again. Nightingale could feel that Wendy's body temperature was falling lower and lower. This made Nightingale feel increasingly anxious. The two had no other alternative than hurrying, and the normally 3-day-long path took them 1.5 days to finish. At the entrance, the horses the prince had left for them were still tied to the ground, and the heap of straw in front of them was still only half-eaten. Nightingale climbed on one horse while carrying Wendy and let it run, followed by Lightning as she rushed non-stop towards Border Town. Chapter 60 Arrangements. Border Town's second militia recruitment went much smoother than the first one. After all, during the winter, the food was rationed so the members of the militia would be given more and better food. On the weekly visiting day, there would be many soldiers who would secretly transfer bread and meat, which they had saved during the week, to their loved ones. Roland told Carter and Iron Axe to overlook these matters, because when those loved ones happily stayed at home with food, they would surely tell their neighbors where they got it. This would be a perfect example of word-of-mouth recommendation, executed by his militia. The conversations between neighbors were much more effective than information announced by the city hall. At this point, most of the urban areas of the town already knew about it. His Highness militia wasn't only well paid, but would also eat 3 meals every day. In addition, the fight with the demonic beast didn't seem so dangerous as previously thought. So during the second recruitment, there were many more candidates than during the first one, and even residents of the better districts came for registration. The number of people who matched the requirements were much higher than the Roland had expected, so the second recruitment accepted 200 new members who would be trained by Carter during the weekdays. When the horn sounded, the new recruits would also rush to the wall to stand as auxiliary forces on standby. The chief knight and the assistant minister raised some objections, like that at this point the new batch of militia wasn't qualified to fight against the demonic beasts, or that the newly recruited unit had more than twice the number of soldiers of the first unit, which wasn't necessary. Increases of the general public food rations and salary would lead to the increase of their financial expenditure, but even so, if they gave out more gold royals they would not achieve a significant effect. However, Roland kept to his decision even though these people were not prepared to deal with the demonic beasts. Yet he didn't dare to inform his men about the plan he came up with. No one was allowed to know that he intended to attack the Duke's stronghold. If he told them about his idea now, he was afraid that Berev and Carter would find it totally unacceptable. The difference between the Longsong stronghold and border town was just too big. As the official border stronghold of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, its walls were 10 feet tall, and was built brick by stonemasons. With the Duke's private army and the 6 noble families' private armies and also the city's own soldiers, they could mobilize more than 1,000 soldiers. In theory, it was impossible to win a siege when one could only rely on his own army of 300, even if they were equipped with crossarrow guns. And because of the God's Stone of Retribution, the witches couldn't be used as an assassination squad. Roland had confirmed this point several times with Nightingale. Duke Ryan and the important people of the 6 families would purchase these stones, not leaving anything to spare. Of course, for the outside world this purchase was called donation. If someone wanted to buy such a stone, they had to donate several dozens of gold royals. Banning the power of the witches within a certain range was the most powerful weapon against the so-called devil's servants and was the biggest annual income source for the church. Roland only had a chance when it was an open field fight. Thanks to this era, most of the soldiers were drafted before a battle. So if the Lord didn't want his drafted army to flee halfway, he was required to travel with his army, which would present a perfect opportunity to implement Roland's annihilation plan. However, he was still unsure about how he could take advantage of this opportunity. After all, his experience of war tactics came only from movies and television works, or historical stories, so he had no experience of his own. In the end, he thought that since he didn't understand it, he should first do the things he was good at. Roland wanted to stretch out a little and left his office to take a walk in his backyard. The steam engine too was assembled and standing quietly in the middle of the field. At first glance, the new steam engine looked much cleaner than the previous one, and the welding marks were no longer as uneven as before. This masterpiece was possible thanks to Anna's new capabilities. Her green fire could drill into the tiniest gaps for welding, allowing for the individual parts to fit better together than in the past. However, the most important difference between the steam engine 2 and the older steam engine wasn't the overall look, but the integration of a centrifugal governor. The first set of the automatic control system and feedback system in human history could be considered as a big milestone. Roland's governor structure was very simple, consisting of 2 iron balls connected with a string to a main rod. At first glance it was just like the bamboo dragonflies that children played with during their childhood. If someone quickly rubbed the bamboo pole, the 2 rotating blades would be forced to automatically rise due to the centrifugal force. For the governor, the equivalent for the fan was the 2 iron balls. When the steam engine worked, the main rod would be driven to rotate, and when the output increased too high, the balls would spin faster, gradually increasing their height under the influence of the centrifugal force, closing the valve bit by bit. When the output decreased, the ball's speed would also get slower, lowering their position under the influence of gravity, thereby increasing the valve output again. This always kept the steam engine running at a relatively fixed power level. With speed control, it was now possible to let the steam engine 2 take over some of the more sophisticated processing tasks. The gears produced by the blacksmiths were delivered and neatly placed in a corner of the shed. Looking at them with the perspective of an industrial production line, none of these gears could be called qualified to work with, and all of them would be thrown into the defective box, waiting to be recycled. But in terms of this age, they were rare works of art. The design of involute gears were created with a sense of harmony. The gears that had been immersed in lard emitted a unique, metallic sheen. In addition to produced gears, carpenters who were responsible for the planning had already built the foundation as well as other parts that were already prepared. He let the door guards call for Anna so that they could begin to assemble the first steam-powered borer together. They began Roland's plan, which he thought was the most effective plan to mass-produce rifles. Relying only on blacksmiths who had to manually knock out a barrel was extremely time-consuming, but also very boring for the blacksmiths themselves. Now, he only had to take out an iron bar and he could directly drill the barrel out with the borer. So in one day, he would be able to produce more than 10 barrels. At the same time, by replacing the head, the boring machine couldn't only be used to cut but also to engrave the rifling. With rifled flintlocks, the firing accuracy would be further improved. Thus, he was confident that before the end of winter, the two groups of militia, nearly 300 people, could all be armed with rifles. However, Roland couldn't guarantee that his army would be able to calmly load, aim, and shoot at their targets in the face of charging knights. It was more realistic to think that they would rather drop their weapons, turn tail, and run away. After all, the training time of the two troops were too short, they had no combat experience against other humans. So, he had to bring out a more powerful weapon onto the battlefield, a weapon which could defeat the enemy even before they could start their own assault. That was artillery. As the god of war in the history of human warfare, the destruction and deterrence brought by artillery wasn't reproducible by guns. A 6-pound field artillery had the range to attack the other side before they were even able to gather. The mixed-up armies of this era would surely be unable to maintain discipline in combat while being under constant fire. As long as he could get 3 or 4 field guns, his enemy would never have the chance to charge. Roland was following a step-by-step plan, with his manual milling machines, which could be used to process usable steering gear. He would be able to produce the speed-controllable steam engine too, and with this machine he could create his own borer. With steam boring, he would be able to process a variety of gun barrels and cannon barrels. There was still at least 2 months until the end of the months of the demons, so as long as his plans played out smoothly, Border Town's militia would have the power to compete with the Duke in a full-out battle.